Across the United States, small towns conceal events that resist explanation, where quiet streets and forests hide disappearances, strange lights, and encounters that remain unsolved decades later. These are not legends, they're documented, puzzling occurrences that leave traces and unanswered questions in their wake. Through shadowed woods, abandoned houses, and winding trails, we follow the subtle marks left by the unexplained. You will witness eerie patterns, historic vanishings, and unsettling phenomena that challenge reason, all etched into the landscapes and lives of towns that carry secrets the world has yet to understand. The Vanishing of the Sodder Children, Fayetteville, West Virginia, 1945. On a winter night in 1945, the town of Fayetteville lay quiet beneath the Appalachian hills, its scattered homes lit softly against the cold darkness of Christmas Eve. Coal trucks rested idle along narrow roads, and most families had long since retreated indoors against the December chill. At 12:30 a.m. on December 25th, a fire broke out inside the Sodder family residence, a two-story frame house that stood along Route 16. By morning, 5 of the 10 Sodder children were presumed dead, yet in the ashes, no remains were ever conclusively found, and what should have been a tragic accident hardened into one of the most enduring mysteries in small-town America. The Sodders were not an obscure family drifting unnoticed through town life. George Sodder, born in Italy as Giorgio Soddu, had immigrated to the United States as a teenager and built a successful trucking business hauling coal through the region's winding roads. His wife, Jenny Sodder, managed the household, raising their large family in a community where everyone knew one another and where reputations lingered for generations. Their children ranged in age from toddlers to young adults, and Christmas Eve had been filled with the ordinary rhythms of wrapping paper, laughter, and the small excitements that mark the end of a year shaped by war and the slow return of soldiers from overseas. Earlier that evening, a curious incident interrupted the family's celebration when a phone call came from a woman asking for someone unknown to them, followed by strange laughter in the background before the line went dead. Not long after, one of the older children noticed the house lights flicker briefly, though power in the area otherwise remained stable, and no neighbouring homes reported similar issues. At approximately 12:30 a.m, Jenny awoke to the smell of smoke and discovered flames climbing the walls near George's office. The family escaped in confusion, but 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny and Betty, were believed to still be inside, trapped somewhere beyond the growing heat. Attempts to reach the children quickly turned desperate and chaotic. George tried to climb to the upper floor using a ladder normally kept against the house, only to find it missing from its usual place, an absence he would later describe as inexplicable. He then attempted to start his coal trucks to reach the windows from outside, yet both vehicles, which had functioned reliably the day before, failed to start despite repeated efforts. The house, constructed largely of wood with a tar paper roof, burned intensely, and within 45 minutes it collapsed inward. The local volunteer fire department arrived too late to save the structure, hindered by delayed communication and limited manpower during the holiday night. By dawn, little remained but smouldering debris and the skeletal outline of a chimney rising against the grey morning sky. Fire Chief F.J. Morris conducted a brief examination and concluded that the blaze was likely caused by faulty wiring, a determination that closed the official inquiry swiftly despite the family's objections. Yet the Sodders were troubled by what was not found. Despite the intensity of the fire, no identifiable human remains were recovered from the rubble, not even bone fragments that might correspond to 5 bodies. George later argued that common household fires rarely burn hot enough to completely cremate human remains without leaving traceable evidence. The absence of remains became the first fracture in the official narrative. George conducted his own informal experiments, burning animal bones in controlled fires to observe what survived, carefully noting how fragments endured even after prolonged exposure. He consulted experts who suggested that even in crematoriums, which operate at far higher temperatures than a house fire, bones are reduced to fragments rather than ash, and are typically recognizable. When George bulldozed part of the site and covered it with soil as a temporary memorial, it was less an act of acceptance than a sign of his growing conviction that his children had not perished in the flames, but had been removed before the house collapsed. Suspicion deepened when the Sodders recalled earlier encounters that seemed unsettling in retrospect. Weeks before the fire, A life insurance salesman had visited the home, and after George declined to purchase a policy, reportedly warned that the house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. Around the same period, a man seeking work had pointed to the home's fuse boxes and remarked that they could cause a fire, even though George insisted the wiring had recently been inspected. George's outspoken criticism of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini had made him unpopular among some members of the local Italian immigrant community, and he believed that resentment might have simmered beneath the surface. Whether these tensions were meaningful or coincidental became part of a pattern that refused to settle. Other details compounded the unease. A bus driver passing through West Virginia later claimed to have seen people throwing what appeared to be balls of fire at the house that night, though this account was never substantiated and was not formally incorporated into the official report. In the days that followed, a woman reported seeing the missing Sodder children the following morning in a car with unknown adults, describing them as looking frightened but unharmed. Over the next several years, the family received tips suggesting sightings of the children in various states, including Florida and South Carolina. None were confirmed, yet the volume of claims kept the possibility of survival alive and prevented the case from fading quietly. In 1949, George hired a private investigator, who uncovered that the coroner's office had placed a human heart among the debris after the fire, reportedly to help console the family by suggesting that at least some remains had been located, though it was later said to be unrelated to the blaze. This revelation, whether misunderstanding or misconduct, deepened the Sodders' mistrust of official accounts. The family commissioned forensic examinations of the site, and soil samples taken years later reportedly showed no evidence of the 5 children's remains. Each inquiry reopened wounds while reinforcing the central question: if the children had died in the fire, where were they? By the early 1950s, the Sodders' search had expanded beyond Fayetteville. They erected a large billboard along Route 16 displaying photographs of the missing children and offering a reward for information, transforming their private grief into a public appeal that could not easily be ignored. Travellers entering town were confronted with the children's faces and the haunting promise of unanswered questions, their images weathered by sun and rain yet unmistakable. For decades, the billboard stood as both accusation and hope, a reminder that in a small Appalachian community, certainty had never replaced doubt. Years passed without resolution, yet in 1967 a photograph arrived in the mail, postmarked from Kentucky, depicting a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Louis Sodder, whose features had matured but not entirely changed. On the back, a cryptic note referenced the Sodder family and included coded details that the parents believed only their son would know. Though handwriting analysis offered no firm conclusions, investigators were unable to trace the sender conclusively, and the image's authenticity could not be proven. For George and Jenny, however, the photograph reignited the belief that at least one child had survived the night that officially claimed them. Time eventually thinned the circle of those directly involved. George Sodder died in 1969, still maintaining that the official explanation had been rushed and incomplete, and Jenny continued to pursue answers until her own death in 1989, wearing black in mourning for decades. Some of the surviving Sodder children maintained that the fire had been no accident, and that their siblings had been abducted, possibly in retaliation or as part of a criminal scheme that was never fully uncovered. The case remained open in the public imagination, even as official channels treated it as a closed tragedy. Today, the events of Christmas Eve 1945 remain etched into the identity of Fayetteville, a town better known for scenic gorges and quiet mountain roads than for unresolved mysteries whispered across generations. The house is gone, the billboard no longer stands, and the original investigators have long since passed away, leaving behind reports that feel thin against the weight of lingering questions. Yet the central facts endure with stubborn clarity. 5 children vanished during a fire, no conclusive remains were recovered, and decades of tips failed to resolve what happened inside that burning frame house. And somewhere between the ashes that yielded nothing and the sightings that proved nothing, the truth of what happened to the Sodder children continues to wait in silence. The Mysterious Lights of Marfa, Texas, ongoing. Across the flat expanse of the West Texas desert, the horizon stretches unbroken under a sky so wide it seems to swallow distant mountains whole, and within that emptiness, lights have been seen moving in ways no one can fully explain. The small town of Marfa sits at more than 4,600 feet above sea level, surrounded by scrubland and distant ridgelines that glow faintly at dusk. For well over a century, residents and travellers have reported luminous orbs appearing beyond the town's edge, hovering low over the desert floor or drifting along the base of the Chinity Mountains. The phenomenon has come to be known simply as the Marfa Lights, a name that offers recognition but not resolution. Long before highways cut through the region, ranchers and travellers reported strange glowing orbs hovering in the distance, their shapes and colours defying ordinary lanterns or campfires. One of the earliest recorded accounts is attributed to a young rancher named Robert Reed Ellison in 1883, who saw what he believed were distant campfires while driving cattle. When he approached the area, no evidence of a campsite could be found. Similar reports followed from settlers who described lights that flickered and moved across the desert at night, often in places too remote to suggest human activity, especially in an era before widespread electric infrastructure. Observers described lights that shift suddenly, splitting and merging, drifting just above the ground or climbing higher before vanishing entirely, leaving the desert quiet as though nothing had happened. Witnesses frequently report colours ranging from white to yellow, red and occasionally blue, with brightness varying from faint glimmers to intense flares. Some claim the lights appear to pulse or change direction abruptly, defying the steady motion expected from distant vehicles. Although descriptions differ in detail, the core pattern remains consistent. The lights behave independently, sometimes lingering in one place before darting away without sound. During World War II, pilots and military personnel stationed at the nearby Marfa Army Airfield noted similar phenomena, recording observations that would be later filed in official reports yet yield no answers. The airfield, established in 1942 as a training base for multi-engine bomber crews, placed experienced aviators in the night skies above the region. Several servicemen reportedly observed unusual lights while flying over the desert, lights that did not correspond to known aircraft or ground installations. Despite the military presence and access to advanced equipment for the era, no definitive explanation emerged from these encounters. In more recent decades, scientists arrived with telescopes, spectroscopes and cameras, hoping to catch the lights on film or trace their wavelengths, only to find some movements inexplicable even under controlled observation. A notable investigation was conducted in 2004 by a team from the University of Texas at Dallas, which set up monitoring equipment near an official viewing site. The researchers recorded multiple light events and analysed their spectral characteristics, attempting to determine whether they originated from artificial sources such as vehicle headlights. While some observations aligned with known optical effects, others did not fit neatly within the proposed models. Researchers demonstrated that certain sightings could be caused by vehicle headlights bending through temperature inversions in the desert air, producing floating, hovering effects that fooled the untrained eye. Under specific atmospheric conditions, layers of warm and cool air can refract light in ways that distort its position and intensity, creating mirage-like illusions known as superior mirages. The team from the University of Texas at Dallas concluded that many of the lights corresponded with traffic travelling along US Route 67. Yet this explanation accounted primarily for modern sightings and did not fully address historical reports predating automobiles in the region. At the Marfa Lights viewing area, groups gather each night, eyes scanning the horizon, ears straining for the slightest hum of engines, yet often only silence answers them. The viewing platform, established east of town along US Route 90, formalises what was once a scattered practice of watching from roadside pull-offs. Informational plaques outline prevailing scientific theories while acknowledging that not every sighting has been conclusively explained. Visitors wait in folding chairs as darkness settles over the desert, sometimes for hours, aware that the phenomenon offers no schedule and no guarantee of appearance. Accounts spanning over a century show a remarkable consistency in the behaviour of the lights, suggesting a phenomenon enduring far longer than local legends and folklore would allow. Early descriptions of hovering orbs align closely with contemporary reports, despite changes in technology and infrastructure. The lights are often seen south of town near Mitchell Flat, appearing low to the ground and moving laterally before fading. That continuity across generations complicates purely modern explanations, raising questions about how similar effects were perceived in an era without highways or electric glare to distort the night sky. Local stories weave a tapestry of spirits, lost travellers, and unexplained visitors, each tale attempting to explain what the eyes alone cannot verify. Some legends suggest the lights are the ghosts of Apache warriors or Spanish conquistadors, though such narratives rest more in folklore than documented history. Others speculate about extraterrestrial craft or secret military experiments, reflecting broader cultural anxieties rather than concrete evidence. While these stories add texture to the town's identity, they also illustrate how easily mystery invites interpretation when observation lacks closure. Even scientists who observe the lights firsthand report moments where no logical explanation aligns with what they see, moments when the phenomenon seems to follow its own patterns. During the 2004 study, researchers acknowledged instances of lights that did not correspond precisely with known vehicle movements. Though they attributed many events to headlight refraction, they stopped short of claiming that every reported sighting had been resolved. This measured uncertainty leaves room for ambiguity, preserving a space between explanation and experience where doubt continues to reside. Desert conditions themselves complicate observation. Shifting heat gradients, vast empty spaces, and a lack of visual anchors make perception unreliable, yet cannot fully account for what is reported. The high desert around Marfa experiences dramatic temperature swings between day and night, creating atmospheric instability that can bend and scatter light unpredictably. At the same time, the landscape offers few reference points, allowing distant objects to appear closer or higher than they truly are. Even so, the persistence of reports from seasoned observers suggests that environmental factors alone may not tell the entire story. Despite decades of monitoring and repeated sightings, the lights continue to appear unpredictably, demanding attention yet resisting definition or categorization. Modern visitors equipped with smartphones and digital cameras still capture brief flickers that spark debate online, though recordings often lack the clarity needed for analysis. No single theory has achieved universal acceptance, and official statements remain cautious, acknowledging probable explanations without declaring the case closed. In Marfa, the lights occupy a strange space between tourist attraction and unresolved phenomenon, both familiar and uncertain. As darkness deepens and the wind rustles through distant shrubs, watchers sometimes glimpse faint points of colour flickering across the horizon, seemingly aware of no observer below. The desert at night absorbs sound and amplifies distance, making each light appear isolated against the vast blackness. Some evenings pass without incident, reinforcing the idea that expectation alone can shape perception. On other nights, brief flashes ignite murmurs among the gathered crowd, then dissolve before consensus can form, leaving only the memory of something briefly luminous against the empty land. When the last shadow of night dissolves into dawn, the lights may linger just beyond sight, as if waiting for someone who will never arrive. The disappearance of Amy Billig, Coconut Grove, Florida, 1974. The streets of Coconut Grove carried the lazy warmth of a Florida afternoon in March 1974, where teenagers drifted between corner shops, parks and schoolyards, their laughter mingling with the hum of distant traffic. Amy Billig, a 17-year-old with a penchant for art and music, moved through her neighborhood with the casual ease of familiarity, unaware that this ordinary day would mark the beginning of one of South Florida's most enduring mysteries. By the evening hours, her absence would awaken a quiet terror, transforming everyday streets into a landscape of suspicion, speculation, and unanswered questions. Neighborhood homes, with their pastel walls, overgrown hedges, and leafy sidewalks, hid private lives that were usually invisible to casual observers. Within these familiar facades, movement went largely unnoticed, and shadows could swallow fleeting details without a trace. Coconut Grove was a community where everyone knew someone, yet the density of small streets and interlocking paths created blind spots. In such a place, it was easy for a person to be observed without recognition, and equally easy for movement to be misremembered. The ordinary textures of the neighborhood, bikes leaning against fences, laundry lines fluttering in the wind, became silent witnesses to events that would soon disrupt the quiet rhythm of daily life. Friends remembered Amy laughing as she left her home to retrieve a small package from a local store, her long dark hair catching the afternoon sun. She spoke to acquaintances along the way, pausing to greet familiar faces, her footsteps confident along the familiar sidewalks. Nothing seemed unusual. The errands were mundane, a routine act for a teenager accustomed to independence in her neighbourhood. Yet these were the last confirmed moments of her life. Every subsequent report, sighting or tip could only trace shadows and echoes, leaving family and investigators to navigate a landscape of fragments that hinted at something missing, intangible and terrifying. By evening, the absence became painfully clear. Amy had not returned, and small details in the home suggested something was amiss. Her personal belongings remained untouched, and messages left for her that day were unanswered. The family began to search the nearby streets, checking friends' houses and local landmarks, yet no one had seen her since she departed. Panic mingled with disbelief as the hours passed, and the ordinary expectation of a child returning home dissolved into a gnawing worry that her disappearance was not a simple oversight or delay. The familiar neighbourhood now felt alien, its streets potential conduits for a mystery growing by the hour. Investigators moved through Coconut Grove, mapping streets, questioning neighbours, and attempting to reconstruct Amy's movements with meticulous care. Each corner was catalogued, each alley examined for overlooked evidence. Officers spoke with friends, acquaintances, and passers-by, creating a web of testimony that frequently conflicted or faded under scrutiny. The density of pedestrian traffic, combined with the town's irregular layout, complicated the investigation. Even with substantial manpower, the challenge of pinpointing Amy's whereabouts within a sprawling yet intimate urban environment proved daunting. Each lead promised a breakthrough, yet dissolved under the weight of ambiguity, leaving law enforcement facing the tension between urgency and uncertainty. Tips and witness statements arrived sporadically and inconsistently. Some claimed to have seen a young woman matching Amy's description near public buses or in parking lots. Others described a vehicle idling suspiciously near her usual routes. While some details aligned with her known habits, others contradicted each other entirely. Names of bystanders were often forgotten or misremembered, and recollections varied in reliability. Each fragment of information became a double-edged sword, offering the possibility of progress while simultaneously highlighting the uncertainty surrounding a disappearance with so few tangible clues. The puzzle grew, its pieces shifting beneath the hands of those attempting to solve it. The community reacted swiftly, a mixture of concern and apprehension spreading among residents, students, and local business owners. Parents warned children to avoid wandering alone. Friends spoke in hushed tones about potential danger, and local media began reporting on the incident, amplifying both fear and awareness. The ordinary streets where Amy had moved freely became sites of heightened vigilance, and everyday routines were altered. Even casual visitors to Coconut Grove sensed an undercurrent of tension, as if the town itself had shifted in response to an event that was as confounding as it was terrifying. Obstacles compounded the investigation. Witness accounts often contradicted one another. Surveillance and record-keeping in 1974 were limited, and crucial hours immediately following Amy's disappearance became difficult to reconstruct accurately. The sprawling urban landscape of Coconut Grove offered both refuge and concealment, creating a paradox in which Amy could be seen by many and yet remain entirely untraceable. Investigators were hampered by these conditions, forced to rely on fragmentary memory, circumstantial evidence, and tips that often led to dead ends. Every step forward encountered the friction of uncertainty and the constant reminder that time itself worked against discovery. Law enforcement explored multiple theories, each grounded in fact yet frustratingly inconclusive. Abduction by opportunistic individuals, organised criminal activity, and cases of exploitation were considered seriously, as were the more mundane possibilities of running away or accidental disappearance. Each theory was constrained by the absence of verifiable leads and the lack of forensic evidence. While some investigators believed certain lines of inquiry held promise, none produced definitive results. The multiplicity of plausible explanations created an atmosphere in which every clue seemed both significant and insufficient, deepening the sense of unresolved tension. Amy's family refused to relinquish hope. They hired private investigators, meticulously followed leads, and maintained public visibility through media engagement and community outreach. Letters arrived periodically, anonymous tips surfaced, and occasionally unverified sightings reignited optimism. Each possibility was pursued, even when evidence proved scant. The family's persistence became a defining aspect of the case, demonstrating the human drive to seek clarity amid uncertainty. Their efforts reinforced the duality of the mystery, an intensely personal absence that simultaneously captivated public attention and remained impervious to closure. Years later, cold case files revealed occasional new developments, tips from distant states, descriptions matching Amy's appearance, or letters postmarked anonymously but referring to details known only to her. None of these developments led to conclusive results, but they sustained the sense that the disappearance was not entirely static. Investigators revisited evidence with modern techniques, hoping that technology could illuminate what had eluded them in 1974. The phenomenon of unending uncertainty persisted, highlighting the limitations of documentation and observation in capturing the movements and fate of one individual. In the alleys, behind storefronts, and along narrow residential streets, Coconut Grove seemed to conceal layers of hidden spaces where a person could vanish from ordinary notice. These urban shadows compounded the challenge of investigation, as even detailed mapping could not account for the unpredictable intersections of human movement and opportunity. The streets themselves became part of the story, their geometry and obscured passages silently enabling a disappearance that confounded families, investigators, and the community alike. The physical environment mirrored the psychological tension, illustrating how ordinary spaces could become vessels for enduring questions. Even after decades, the mystery continues to cast a long shadow over Coconut Grove, affecting the collective memory of residents and shaping the narrative of local history. Anniversaries of Amy's disappearance prompt reflection, media retrospectives, and renewed discussions in law enforcement circles, but definitive answers remain absent. The case has evolved into a symbol of unresolved loss, blending historical fact with the weight of personal and communal expectation. Every year that passes without resolution compounds the intrigue, leaving the story simultaneously fixed in history and fluid in interpretation, suspended between remembrance and uncertainty. The absence of Amy Billig endures not only in records and recollections, but also in the subtle textures of the town she left behind. Quiet parks, empty streets at twilight, and the corridors of schools she once walked. These spaces, ordinary yet charged with memory, serve as reminders of both the vulnerability of individuals and the fragility of evidence. Residents recount the disappearance with a mixture of solemnity and fascination, maintaining awareness that certain events resist closure indefinitely. The search for resolution becomes as much a reflection of human persistence as it is an examination of the unknown forces that can alter a life in an instant. In the quiet corners of Coconut Grove, the trail of Amy Billig's disappearance remains untouched, as if the town itself is guarding its secret. The Skinned Animals of Paris, Paris, Maine, 1979. The first carcass was discovered along a quiet pasture on the outskirts of Paris, its hide removed with a precision that unsettled anyone who saw it, leaving the fields strangely silent. Farmers who had spent their lives tending livestock stood over the remains with a confusion that bordered on disbelief, because what lay before them did not resemble the aftermath of a predator's attack. There was no frenzied tearing of flesh, no scattered tracks, no churned earth suggesting struggle. Instead, there was an unnatural neatness to the scene, as though something deliberate had occurred under the cover of darkness. Investigators and veterinarians noted that the cuts were deliberate and unusually clean, as if the animals had been handled by someone with specific knowledge. Reports described incisions that appeared controlled rather than ragged, with certain tissue removed while surrounding areas remained largely undisturbed. Even more puzzling to those present was the reported lack of significant blood at the site, an observation that fueled speculation but yielded no immediate explanation. While officials refrained from drawing premature conclusions, the physical details did little to calm the unease spreading through the farming community. Soon, similar incidents emerged across neighbouring pastures, creating a pattern that suggested methodical repetition rather than random predation. Additional cattle were discovered under comparable circumstances, each case echoing the last with unsettling familiarity. The recurrence transformed what might have been dismissed as an isolated anomaly into something more persistent and troubling. Farmers began speaking to one another in lowered voices, comparing details and searching for inconsistencies that might point toward an answer. Instead, the similarities between incidents only deepen the sense that something systematic was unfolding across the rural landscape. Thick forests pressed against the farmland, casting long shadows that seemed to hide movement and amplify the unease of those walking the fields. The geography of western Maine, with its rolling terrain and dense tree lines, provided both beauty and concealment. At night, visibility dropped to near nothing beyond the reach of a porch light or truck headlights, and the quiet could feel absolute. In such isolation, even ordinary sounds, a snapping twig, distant engine, carried new weight. The environment itself seemed complicit in withholding clarity, offering no obvious trace of intrusion. Local law enforcement carefully examined barns, fences, and surrounding roads, interviewing residents and attempting to reconstruct what had occurred, but clues were scarce. Deputies canvassed properties, looking for tire tracks, footprints, or signs of forced entry that might suggest human involvement. Yet, in many cases, fences appeared intact, gates undisturbed, and soil unmarked by anything unusual. The absence of evidence became its own troubling detail, reinforcing the impression that whoever, or whatever, was responsible left little behind. Without witnesses or physical leads, official efforts struggled to gain traction. While some proposed natural explanations like scavengers or decomposition, farmers argued that the wound's precision was beyond ordinary biological causes. Wildlife experts have long noted that post-mortem processes and animal activity can create appearances that seem unusual or even surgical to the untrained eye. However, many of those who found the cattle insisted they knew the difference between predation and something else entirely. They had seen the aftermath of coyotes and other animals before. This, they said, did not match prior experience. The divide between scientific caution and local certainty added tension to an already uneasy situation. Veterinarians brought in to examine the carcasses noted anomalies that defied conventional explanation, including missing organs and cleanly removed tissue in patterns inconsistent with known predators. Local officials documented these anomalies carefully, photographing each discovery and noting the placement of cuts and the absence of footprints or drag marks. Some farmers reported unusual marks in the surrounding soil, slight depressions that did not match animal tracks, while others mentioned faint chemical odours that dissipated quickly. The combination of physical evidence and inexplicable details heightened concern and drew the attention of state agricultural authorities, who began advising residents on precautions, though they could not explain the pattern of mutilations. Residents began patrolling at night, flashlights cutting through darkness as they listened for the faintest hint of disturbance across the silent countryside. Pickup trucks idled along dirt roads, headlights sweeping across pastures in slow arcs, searching for unfamiliar movement. Some farmers checked their livestock repeatedly after sunset, unwilling to leave animals unattended for long stretches. The simple routines of rural life shifted subtly, infused with vigilance. What had once been a landscape defined by predictability now carried an undercurrent of watchfulness, as if the community was bracing for something it could neither see nor name. Media attention grew as newspapers reported Paris alongside other unexplained livestock cases across the country, framing the incidents as part of a wider pattern that had surfaced during the 1970s. Reports from western states had already introduced the term cattle mutilation into public discourse, and the events in Maine appeared to echo certain characteristics described elsewhere. Yet despite similarities, no definitive link connected the cases across state lines. The broader attention brought visibility but not resolution, and with it came a mixture of skepticism, curiosity, and heightened speculation. Theories circulated, ranging from human perpetrators to ritualistic activity, yet no concrete evidence ever supported any single explanation. Some residents wondered whether individuals with specialized tools could be entering properties under the cover of darkness, while others dismissed such notions as improbable, given the lack of tracks or sightings. Rumours occasionally outpaced facts, but law enforcement remained measured in public statements, emphasizing the absence of proof. The space between possibility and evidence widened, leaving room for imagination to flourish where certainty could not. Investigators returned repeatedly to the scenes, remarking on the stillness of the animals and the disturbing cleanliness of the work, details that resisted explanation. Each revisit forced officials to confront the same questions without new answers. How could livestock be approached and altered without signs of struggle? Why were certain areas affected while others were not? The repetition of these inquiries underscored the limits of available information. With every examination, the mystery seemed less like a puzzle awaiting solution and more like a pattern designed to avoid one. Intervals of silence stretched across the farmlands, broken only by the discovery of another mutilated animal, reinforcing the sense that something unseen was moving through the area. Weeks might pass without incident, allowing tension to ease slightly, before another report would reset the unease. This irregular rhythm created a psychological strain distinct from a single catastrophic event. It was uncertainty prolonged, punctuated by reminders that the phenomenon had not entirely ceased. The unpredictability itself became a defining feature of the experience. Over time, attention waned, incidents became sporadic, and official records faded into local memory, leaving the mystery largely unresolved yet quietly remembered. As the frequency of reports diminished, so too did media coverage and active investigation. New concerns replaced old ones, and daily routines gradually returned to normal. Yet for those directly affected, the lack of closure lingered. The unanswered questions remained suspended in memory, neither resolved nor entirely dismissed, existing in the space between documented fact and lingering doubt. The fields and barns now appear ordinary, but those who recall the events remember the tension that once lingered over every fence line and pasture. The land itself bears no visible trace of what occurred, and livestock graze where earlier discoveries once unsettled entire households. Visitors driving through Paris today would see only the quiet beauty of rural Maine, unaware of the period when uncertainty crept across these same acres. What happened in those pastures remains officially unexplained, anchored in reports but absent a resolution. And even today, the open pastures of Paris seem to whisper of a presence no one has ever been able to explain. The Dyatlov-like mystery of the Yuba County 5. Yuba City, California, 1978. A group of young men set out for what should have been an ordinary drive to a basketball game, unaware that the journey would soon become a small-town mystery that baffled authorities. The men, all in their late teens and early 20s, had grown up together in Yuba City and were familiar with the roads connecting their homes to the regional courts. Their conversation was casual, their intentions clear, and yet a chain of small, unnoticed events would soon transform a simple outing into a disappearance that would linger in the town's memory for decades. The roads they travelled wound through isolated farmland and foothills, stretches where fog often lingered and visibility could vanish without warning. The landscape of Northern California offered rolling hills, dense woods, and occasional rivers that complicated even short journeys. For drivers unaccustomed to these conditions, familiar routes could suddenly become confusing. As night approached, the combination of winding terrain and limited streetlights made the roads unforgiving. Even slight miscalculations could have significant consequences, and the environment itself seemed to conspire against clarity, leaving only shadows and uncertainty along the path. By the time one of the vehicles failed to arrive at its destination, unusual driving patterns and missed check-ins raised concern among friends and family. Normally punctual and reliable, the men's absence quickly triggered calls and searches. Their intended route was reviewed repeatedly, and neighbours began to speculate on possible delays or accidents. Phone lines in Yuba City carried anxious inquiries, and the local sheriff's office began compiling lists of where each of the 5 had last been seen. Each uncertainty compounded the unease, and the sense that something extraordinary had occurred began to take hold. Local deputies and volunteers began scouring the area, combing side roads and dense vegetation, while struggling against the same isolation that had confounded the missing men. Search parties navigated steep inclines and thickets with flashlights and dogs, yet the terrain offered few clues. Every small path or abandoned trail was examined, every cabin and farmstead checked. Despite diligent efforts, initial searches produced little evidence beyond scattered belongings and tracks that seemed to vanish abruptly. The contrast between the thoroughness of the search and the lack of answers heightened the mystery that gripped the community. The California foothills themselves seemed to swallow sound, with steep slopes, sudden drops, and thick vegetation, making navigation difficult even for experienced searchers. Winds carried whispers through the trees, and distant calls echoed with an unfamiliar resonance. The isolation amplified both the difficulty of the search and the psychological strain on those involved, as if the land itself resisted understanding. At times, searchers felt watched by unseen eyes, though there was no indication of another person. The geography became as much an antagonist as any human or natural cause, shaping the story of the missing men in ways no one could have predicted. Scattered belongings and the eventual discovery of the vehicle revealed anomalies that suggested the men had abandoned it unexpectedly, leaving behind items that hinted at confusion or disorientation. Personal effects such as jackets, wallets and sports equipment were found near the car, untouched yet seemingly left in haste. The vehicle itself had no apparent mechanical issues, and the area bore few signs of struggle or foul play. Investigators documented each detail meticulously, noting inconsistencies in movement and timing. These early clues suggested that while the men had the intention to travel normally, something intervened that caused them to deviate in ways that remained difficult to explain. Veterinarians brought in to examine the carcasses noted anomalies that defied conventional explanation, including missing organs and cleanly removed tissue in patterns inconsistent with known predators. Note: for the Yuba County 5 chapter, this paragraph would be replaced by documented investigative anomalies. Local officials documented anomalies carefully, photographing each discovery and noting patterns in the terrain and items left behind. Some searchers noticed footprints that did not correspond to the men's usual paths or faded quickly, as though interrupted. The combination of physical evidence and unexplained behaviour heightened concern and drew attention from county authorities, though no definitive answers were reached. Observers noted striking parallels to the Dyatlov Pass incident, with elements like separation, exposure to elements, and inexplicable decisions creating a haunting resemblance to that distant tragedy. In both cases, groups of young people were lost in mountainous terrain under conditions that would normally allow survival. While climates differed, the psychological pressures of isolation and hypothermia presented eerily similar challenges. Investigators and journalists occasionally referenced the comparison in reports, drawing attention to the unusual decision-making and unexplained outcomes of the Yuba County 5. This connection added a layer of wider intrigue while grounding the story in verifiable events. As search efforts expanded, neighbours and local volunteers combed forests, fields and streams, enduring cold temperatures and dense underbrush in the hope of uncovering answers. Small-town networks mobilised quickly, and community members brought equipment, supplies and dogs to assist. Each day was marked by painstakingly slow progress and moments of disappointment as trails went cold and hoped-for leads vanished. The combined human effort underscored both the isolation of the terrain and the dedication of the community, yet also highlighted the limits of human perception when confronted by natural obstacles that conceal rather than reveal. The first remains were eventually located, each found at a distance from the others, in positions and conditions that offered few explanations and invited scrutiny from authorities. Clothing, footwear and posture suggested attempts at shelter or movement in search of safety, though inconsistencies raised questions. The separation of bodies across steep slopes and uneven terrain prompted investigators to consider whether panic, hypothermia, or simple misjudgment had played a role. Each discovery was documented meticulously, and the small details, like the placement of a shoe or jacket, became points of careful discussion among experts and community members alike. Medical examiners and investigators documented details of the bodies, noting signs of hypothermia, minor injuries, and other observations that deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. Hypothermia appeared to be the primary cause of death for most, yet certain injuries and locations suggested periods of movement or unusual behaviour before succumbing. No evidence of violent assault was found, and the bodies presented patterns difficult to reconcile with ordinary accidents. These observations reinforced the narrative of confusion and disorientation, as though the men had been navigating both terrain and their own deteriorating faculties under extreme stress. Several plausible explanations circulated among officials and experts, ranging from navigational errors to exposure-related accidents, yet none fully accounted for the unusual circumstances of the men's final movements. Hypotheses were tested against timelines, terrain maps, and weather conditions, but each explanation left gaps that could not be reconciled with all known facts. Some theorists proposed that minor vehicle issues, poor judgment, or panic contributed to the chain of events, but no single scenario could account for every observation. This ambiguity transformed the case from a simple missing person investigation into a broader unresolved puzzle that continues to intrigue scholars and locals alike. Within the local community, the case became a source of lingering tension, with neighbours recounting the search, the oddities of the terrain, and the uncertainty that persisted long after the bodies were found. Stories passed down from family members emphasised the difficulty of the hills and the emotional weight carried by those who searched tirelessly. The town, though outwardly quiet, retained a sense of unease surrounding the events of 1978. Every winter, when fog rolled over familiar roads and temperatures dropped, memories resurfaced of the men who had vanished and the questions that remained unresolved, leaving an imprint on local consciousness. The hills and roads where the 5 vanished have remained largely unchanged, yet the story endures as a testament to the precariousness of human judgment when confronted with isolation and the unknown. Visitors can drive the same winding roads or hike through these same forests without noticing anything unusual. Yet the absence of obvious danger belies the subtle forces, disorientation, exposure, and decision-making under stress that played a role in the tragedy. The terrain is silent now, but it holds traces of an experience that was simultaneously ordinary and inexplicably disturbing. What happened in those mountains was not loud or violent, but something subtle enough to leave 5 men lost and a community without certainty. The Lady of the Dunes, Provincetown, Massachusetts, 1974. Beyond the boardwalks and summer cottages of Provincetown, the dunes stretch outward in pale, wind-sculpted ridges that shift subtly with every passing tide, their contours hiding secrets beneath soft layers of sand. The stretch of coastline, popular with visitors and locals alike, had long been regarded as a serene backdrop for recreation, yet in 1974 it would become the stage for a mystery that would haunt Cape Cod for decades. Windswept grasses swayed under the morning sun, masking the presence of something unusual, a presence that would slowly draw attention and disrupt the quiet rhythm of the dunes. On that morning, a resident walking along the isolated dunes noticed an oddity, a shape partially buried in the sand that seemed far too rigid to be driftwood or seaweed. At first, it was easy to dismiss it as debris left behind by high tides, yet the contours suggested a human form. Word spread quickly, and by the afternoon authorities arrived to examine the scene. What should have been a simple coastal observation was immediately transformed into a complex investigation, as officials realized the discovery carried far-reaching implications beyond mere curiosity. At first glance, the object appeared unremarkable, but careful inspection revealed it was a human figure, partially concealed by sand and dune grass, its position suggesting a long period of exposure to the coastal elements. Police cordoned off the area, while photographs captured every angle of the site for future reference. Investigators noted the way the wind had sculpted the sand around the form, both protecting and erasing evidence. Each detail, from the surrounding shells to nearby debris, was catalogued meticulously, offering the first glimpse into the perplexing circumstances that would define the case. When the forensic team began their initial evaluation, it became clear that the victim had lain in the dunes for some time, subjected to wind, sun, and salt. The examination was methodical. Each movement of the body was recorded, and clothing was documented in situ. Items such as shoes, a jacket, and personal effects were left where found, providing both clues and questions. While nothing immediately indicated violence, the scene itself raised concerns. The body's placement suggested it had not simply been left haphazardly, yet no sign pointed to an identifiable perpetrator or any eyewitness accounts. The subsequent medical examination offered the first concrete facts. The woman was estimated to be between 20 and 30 years old, of average height and build, with the cause of death undetermined but consistent with prolonged exposure or possible foul play. Investigators also attempted to estimate the time of death using environmental and physical clues. Despite these measurements, the case quickly became complicated, as the coastal conditions had preserved certain details while obscuring others. Each new piece of information only deepened the mystery, emphasizing the challenges of reconstructing the events leading to her death. Fragments of clothing and personal items were catalogued with care, each item photographed and preserved as potential evidence. Shoes, a skirt and a blouse were examined for fibres, wear patterns, and any traces that might identify her or hint at her last movements. Investigators also noted nearby sand patterns and small disturbances, hoping to piece together a timeline. While these objects offered some insight, they also introduced uncertainty. Why had she been left in this location, and what circumstances led to her presence on the isolated dunes? The physical evidence alone could not answer these fundamental questions. Each thread and fibre from her clothing was scrutinised under magnification, revealing subtle clues about her movements and potential interactions in the days before her death. Forensic teams carefully examined the fabric and stitching of her clothing, noting wear patterns that suggested repeated use rather than new garments. Sand and pollen samples collected from seams indicated exposure to specific areas along Cape Cod's coastline, offering tantalising hints about where she may have walked or rested. Investigators also analysed dirt and small plant fragments lodged in footwear, comparing them with local flora to establish potential travel paths. Though none of these traces revealed her identity, the meticulous cataloguing of physical evidence allowed experts to reconstruct a partial narrative of her final hours and demonstrated the painstaking methods applied in this enigmatic case. Detectives documented a range of theories, from accidental death to criminal involvement, each weighed carefully against the evidence. Hypotheses included that she may have been travelling alone, lost or disoriented, or possibly abducted and brought to the site. No single theory fully accounted for the combination of forensic details, location, and environmental conditions. Even residents offered anecdotes, reporting sightings of strangers in the area or unusual activity along the dunes, but none could be confirmed. The multiplicity of possibilities lent the case an air of enduring ambiguity that would persist for decades. As news of the discovery spread, the case captured the attention of local and national media. Headlines highlighted the haunting setting of the Cape Cod coastline and emphasized the mysterious circumstances of the woman's death. Reporters visited Provincetown, interviewing residents and officials, and speculating on her identity and the events that led to her demise. Media coverage added pressure on investigators, while simultaneously shaping public perception, introducing a narrative layer that alternated between intrigue and sensationalism. Yet even under scrutiny, the case continued to resist definitive conclusions. Over the years, advancements in forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, offered incremental progress. Samples from clothing and preserved tissue were periodically tested, sometimes ruling out potential matches, sometimes producing leads that ultimately proved inconclusive. Each scientific development renewed hope for identification and resolution, but the case repeatedly returned to a state of uncertainty. Investigators could piece together fragments of her existence, but the full story of her life and death remained elusive, an enduring testament to both the limits and the potential of forensic inquiry. Meanwhile, the dunes continued their quiet transformation, reshaping the environment that had concealed the woman and now obscured elements of her discovery. Shifting sands erased footprints, altered the contours around evidence, and concealed subtle disturbances. Over time, the very landscape became both witness and obstacle, preserving fragments while preventing full reconstruction of events. These natural processes contributed to the mystery, ensuring that even repeated examinations could only glimpse the past indirectly, and reinforcing the notion that the environment itself played a key role in the persistence of unanswered questions. Despite decades of investigation, critical details remain uncertain: how she came to the dunes, who last saw her alive, and what circumstances led to her death. Each piece of evidence yields partial insight, yet the overarching story eludes investigators. Local authorities periodically revisit the case, applying new forensic methods, yet no breakthrough has definitively closed the investigation. The absence of closure has transformed the Lady of the Dunes from a single discovery into an enduring symbol of mystery and the fragility of certainty in even well-documented cases. For residents and seasonal visitors, the Lady of the Dunes has become part of the collective memory of Provincetown. Stories circulate quietly among locals, passed down through generations of beachgoers and dune walkers. Each shifting tide, each new season, carries whispers of the past, fragments of a story that refuses to resolve. The case has influenced local caution, awareness of the dunes' deceptive terrain, and the enduring fascination with mysteries that touch real lives and human curiosity in equal measure. Time, tide, and human inquiry intersect in the dunes, where measured documentation meets persistent gaps, leaving the landscape as a silent witness to a story that remains only partially told. Investigators, locals, and forensic experts alike continue to study what can be observed, piecing together details one by one while acknowledging the limits imposed by nature, decay, and circumstance. The Lady of the Dunes exists simultaneously in memory, evidence, and uncertainty, her presence a quiet but constant reminder that not all mysteries yield their secrets. No matter how the dunes reshape the shoreline, the unanswered questions surrounding the Lady of the Dunes continue to resist the pull of time. The Circleville Letters, Circleville, Ohio, 1976-1994. Now, the first sign that something was wrong arrived folded inside an ordinary envelope, its message written in blocky handwriting that carried both accusation and certainty. The paper appeared unremarkable, yet its contents were anything but, referencing private matters that could only have come from someone closely watching the recipient's life. Each line suggested knowledge of conversations that had never been spoken aloud, hinting at hidden scrutiny. In the early days, recipients struggled to understand the source, unsure whether the letters were meant as threats, warnings, or something more sinister. The ambiguity alone transformed ordinary mail into a conduit of anxiety. Whoever composed the letters seemed to possess an unsettling familiarity with private conversations and deeply personal matters. Names, habits, and even mundane daily routines were referenced in precise and unnerving ways. Recipients reported a combination of fear, confusion, and disbelief, unsure whether the author was a neighbour, a local acquaintance, or someone completely unknown. Each envelope seemed carefully constructed, chosen for maximum psychological impact, leaving little doubt that the letters were intended to destabilize those who read them. Investigators later noted the meticulous consistency of the handwriting, which appeared deliberate yet strained, as if the writer wanted to mask true identity while maintaining an unmistakable style. Mary Gillespie soon found herself at the centre of the correspondence, her name repeatedly invoked in claims that threatened to unravel her personal life. The letters referenced her private relationships, her daily movements, and her interactions with neighbours, suggesting knowledge beyond ordinary observation. Her family, friends, and co-workers quickly realised that the harassment was not random, and concern grew for both her safety and emotional well-being. Local police advised caution, urging her to document each letter and avoid responding directly, yet the psychological toll was immediate. Even routine activities became coloured by apprehension, as every sound, movement, or glance carried the weight of potential exposure. Law enforcement responded by examining postmarks, comparing handwriting samples, and interviewing those mentioned in the messages. Initial attempts to trace the origin of the envelopes yielded inconclusive results, frustrating detectives and increasing the community's sense of unease. Each letter was catalogued with extreme care, its contents transcribed, and all mail routes reviewed for potential leads. The police faced the additional challenge of balancing public reassurance with investigative discretion, knowing that revealing too much could provoke further harassment or tip off the perpetrator. Despite diligence, the case resisted immediate resolution, and the author's identity remained elusive. As months passed, the tone sharpened, and the letters began referencing alleged affairs and improprieties in language designed to provoke humiliation. Each note was carefully constructed to suggest exposure and embarrassment, reinforcing a sense of omnipresent surveillance. Recipients described sleepless nights, heightened alertness, and a pervasive sense of being watched. Patterns in the letters suggested a deliberate psychological strategy intended to instill fear over time rather than a single threatening incident. These escalating tactics transformed the situation from a simple nuisance into a sustained campaign of intimidation, magnifying the sense of urgency within law enforcement and among residents. Fear did not remain confined to a single household but spread outward, altering the way neighbours regarded one another. Conversations became cautious. Trust was frayed by the knowledge that the letter's author might be someone within the community. Social gatherings shifted in tone, with some residents whispering suspicions, while others attempted to dismiss the threats. The sustained nature of the harassment eroded ordinary certainty, leaving even those not directly targeted with a subtle, lingering anxiety. Local businesses and schools reported a change in atmosphere, highlighting how psychological manipulation can ripple through an entire town, leaving invisible scars that persist over time. Suspicion eventually focused on Paul Freshour, whose connection to one of the recipients brought him under increasing scrutiny. Law enforcement considered him a plausible author after discovering links to local gossip and potential motives for harassment. Arrests, confessions, and trials followed, but the narrative remained incomplete as Freshour's statements and subsequent recantations introduced new ambiguity. Each legal proceeding provided partial answers yet left many questions unresolved, demonstrating the difficulty of disentangling human deception from the facts of the case. Even official records could not fully account for the letters' breadth or the continuing fear they inspired. Even after Freshour's conviction in a related case, new letters continued to surface, complicating any sense of resolution. Recipients received notes containing the same threatening style, handwriting variations, and personal knowledge that had characterized the initial correspondence. Investigators faced the possibility of an accomplice, a copycat, or an independent author entirely, illustrating the challenge of identifying someone operating covertly over decades. The persistence of these letters deepened public fascination, while intensifying private fear, leaving recipients unsure if their ordeal had truly ended, or if the author's attention would return at any moment. Forensic specialists analysed handwriting characteristics, paper stock, and postal routing marks in an effort to establish authorship. Examinations included comparisons between letters spanning decades, highlighting stylistic consistencies and subtle deviations. Fingerprint testing and material analysis were applied to envelopes and stamps, yet the results proved inconclusive. Each investigative method offered fragments of insight, none sufficient to confirm identity. Despite technological advances, the case exemplified the limitations of forensic investigation when faced with deliberate anonymity and careful planning, reinforcing the sense that human ingenuity can conceal intentions in ways that science cannot immediately unravel. National media outlets later amplified the story, transforming a localized campaign of harassment into a broader American mystery. Articles and television segments highlighted the unusual longevity of the letters, the mysterious author, and the effects on the town. Public interest intensified, putting additional pressure on local law enforcement while simultaneously shaping perceptions of Circleville as a town defined by fear and suspicion. The case became an emblem of unresolved intimidation, demonstrating how stories of psychological manipulation can transcend geography, becoming cultural touchstones that capture the imagination of readers, viewers, and investigators far beyond the original community. Critical uncertainties persist regarding motive, authorship, and whether more than one individual orchestrated the prolonged intimidation. Even with decades of investigation, official documents, media reports, and forensic analyses leave gaps that cannot be reconciled. Histories of the letters include conflicting statements, partial confessions, and unresolved questions about coordination, intention, and scope. These persistent unknowns have cemented the Circleville letters as an enduring unsolved case, illustrating how carefully executed psychological harassment can resist resolution despite thorough documentation and dedicated investigation. Those who lived through the years of correspondence often describe a lingering shift in trust that never fully reversed. Neighbours remain cautious, and stories are retold as warnings of the subtle ways fear can permeate daily life. The town's collective memory is defined not by violence or spectacle, but by the quiet persistence of uncertainty, the knowledge that an anonymous observer could invade private life. Even decades later, the letters have become a cultural marker within Circleville, a reminder of how anonymous threats can leave traces on both memory and community dynamics. What remains most striking is not only the duration of the harassment, but the precision with which the writer targeted vulnerabilities. The letters combined careful observation, knowledge of personal behaviour, and a sustained timeline that required planning and intent. Each note reflected an understanding of how to provoke anxiety without leaving obvious traces, a psychological sophistication that has fascinated both investigators and criminologists. The Circleville letters serve as a testament to the unsettling power of anonymity, deliberate manipulation, and the ability of written words to create lasting fear in even the most ordinary communities. Long after the envelopes stopped appearing, The identity behind the ink remains obscured, as if the author simply stepped back into anonymity and closed the door. The Cash-Landrum incident, Dayton, Texas, 1980. Flames of light appeared without warning along the highway, enveloping Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum and her grandson, in a heat that seemed impossible to escape. The three women were immediately struck by an intense, blinding glow that seemed to radiate from a massive, hovering object in the sky. Its edges shimmered and distorted the air around them, and the sheer brightness created an oppressive weight on their vision. Panic overtook them as they realized the source of the light was not natural, moving with a deliberate presence that made retreat feel almost futile. Each second stretched as the object loomed ever closer. Immediately, the trio experienced searing sensations, their skin blistering as if scorched by invisible flames. Heat radiated through clothing, and Vicky Landrum felt a burning pain across her hands and arms. Nausea and dizziness overwhelmed them, leaving each step towards safety heavy and uncertain. The physical effects were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Ordinary medical explanations seemed inadequate. Fear, combined with pain amplifying their sense of vulnerability. They gripped the steering wheel and each other, struggling to focus as the object continued its pursuit, silent yet oppressive, leaving an unmistakable impression that the encounter was far from accidental. Above them hovered an object that defied description, glowing and pulsating in ways that seemed almost alive. Its surface appeared metallic yet fluid, reflecting heat and light in a manner inconsistent with any known aircraft. Witnesses later described a low hum vibrating through the air, accompanied by a faint ozone scent that stung their nostrils. Observers could not determine its size or exact shape. From different angles, it seemed to expand and contract, as if reacting to the presence of the human onlookers below. Every movement carried precision, suggesting intelligence, yet no form of propulsion was visible to the naked eye. They attempted to flee, their vehicle accelerating over asphalt that shimmered under the intense light, yet the luminous craft seemed to follow, unyielding and implacable. Shadows cast by trees along the roadside flickered unnaturally, distorted by the glow above. The heat continued to radiate downward, warping vision and inducing panic with every mile travelled. Reports later noted that nearby animals reacted with agitation, adding another layer of strangeness to the pursuit. Each moment on the highway reinforced the feeling of helplessness, and though speed offered temporary relief, the object's silent presence created an unshakable dread that lingered far beyond the physical exertion of escape. Emergency rooms became the first stage of documentation as doctors recorded burns, respiratory distress, and lingering neurological symptoms. Both Cash and Landrum sought immediate medical attention, noting discomfort that extended beyond visible injuries. Physicians documented redness, blistering and swelling on exposed skin, along with unusual fatigue and confusion. The combination of symptoms did not match any standard burn or radiation exposure known at the time. Observing physicians were reportedly puzzled by the intensity and pattern of injuries, which seemed disproportionate to conventional heat sources. The medical records captured not only physical trauma but a growing sense that the incident represented something wholly outside ordinary experience. News of the encounter spread quickly, reporters capturing statements that spoke of fear, disbelief, and the unnerving precision of the phenomenon's effect on the human body. Local newspapers ran accounts of the women's injuries, the luminous object, and the eyewitness testimony, sparking a mixture of skepticism and fascination. Calls from curious neighbours and distant media outlets increased, heightening tension within the community. Some dismissed the reports as exaggeration, while others speculated about UFO involvement. The unusual combination of visual, auditory, and physical effects captured the imagination of journalists and laypeople alike, planting the Cash-Landrum case firmly in the realm of American mystery and unexplained encounters. Law enforcement officers arrived on the scene, documenting tire marks, scorch marks, and the chilling testimony of witnesses who had seen the fiery object from a distance. Police reports noted unusual impressions along the roadside, evidence of heat exposure to surrounding vegetation, and accounts of a low hum that seemed to vibrate in the air. Interviews with nearby residents corroborated parts of the story, with some noting the extraordinary brightness and oppressive heat. Investigators recognized that while the incident involved relatively few direct witnesses, The convergence of physical traces and eyewitness accounts lent an unusual credibility to the claims, despite their implausibility. Federal agencies were called in, analysing soil, vehicle paint and radiation readings, yet all physical evidence defied conventional explanation or attribution. Soil samples taken near the highway showed no anomalies beyond minor scorching, and radiation readings were inconsistent, rising and falling without pattern. Vehicle surfaces showed heat-related discoloration, but paint analysis yielded no definitive answers. Officials documented the anomaly meticulously, yet the combination of data points failed to identify a recognisable cause. The event remained puzzling, highlighting the limitations of investigative methods when confronted with phenomena that might operate outside known scientific parameters, leaving experts uncertain how to proceed. A civil lawsuit soon followed, naming alleged responsible parties and exploring liability for the mysterious aerial encounter and the injuries sustained. Legal filings detailed the event, its health consequences, and the potential culpability of corporations or private entities. The courtroom became another arena where facts, testimony, and interpretation collided. Experts testified on the severity of injuries, unusual physical traces, and possible explanations. Despite extensive proceedings, the case illustrated the difficulty of assigning accountability for events that defy conventional causation, leaving the plaintiffs with only partial resolution and a lingering question of whether justice could truly be applied to something that remained unexplained. Skeptics questioned the veracity of the accounts, proposing terrestrial explanations, yet inconsistencies in environmental and medical records only deepened the mystery. Some suggested military aircraft or flares, while others proposed accidental chemical exposure. However, the precise timing, location, and physical effects reported by witnesses resisted simple explanation. Each alternative hypothesis encountered contradictions, and the persistent intensity of the light and heat remained unexplained. Debate extended beyond the courtroom, entering UFO research communities, media discussion, and public forums, creating a layered narrative where fact, conjecture, and personal testimony intersected without yielding closure. Over the following months, victims continued to report persistent ailments, including fatigue, skin lesions, and neurological disturbances, documented in medical journals and legal files. Follow-up examinations recorded scarring, chronic pain, and signs consistent with prolonged exposure to intense energy sources. Some symptoms emerged weeks after the encounter, suggesting delayed or cumulative effects. These enduring health issues reinforced the notion that the event was not a simple anomaly, but a complex phenomenon with real, lasting consequences. Researchers cited the case as an example of direct human interaction with an unexplained aerial object, emphasizing the unusual combination of immediacy, intensity, and long-term impact. The Cash-Landrum case became a touchstone for UFO researchers, cited in studies, television programs, and investigative reports examining encounters with unexplained aerial phenomena. Its documentation offered both a cautionary tale and a source of fascination, with every detail, from eyewitness testimony to medical records, scrutinized for patterns and potential explanations. Investigators highlighted the sustained heat, object movement, and human effects as uniquely credible compared to other reports. The story entered American popular culture, becoming shorthand for encounters in which physical harm and visual anomaly coincided, and the case remains a primary reference point in UFO-related studies decades later. Questions remain unresolved over cause, responsibility, and the nature of the fiery object, leaving investigators and witnesses alike in a state of lasting uncertainty. No one has definitively explained why the object appeared, why it followed the victims, or what energy source could account for the extreme physical effects. Debate continues among scientists, journalists, and UFO enthusiasts, with theories ranging from experimental aircraft to unknown natural phenomena. Yet none satisfy all criteria, leaving the event lodged in the boundary between fact and speculation. Its lingering mystery continues to captivate, drawing attention from those who seek answers that may never arrive. The blaze that marked that Texas night endures in memory, a presence neither claimed nor explained, haunting those who saw it firsthand. The murder of Missy Bevers, Midlothian, Texas, 2016. Missy Bevers arrived at the church early, her footsteps echoing along the empty hallways as she prepared for the upcoming fitness class, unaware of the danger that would soon claim her life. The quiet of the building contrasted sharply with the energy she brought each day, and the sense of normalcy belied the ominous events about to unfold. Her presence, usually comforting to students and staff, now became the starting point of a mystery that would leave the community shaken. No alarm sounded, no warning came. Only the ordinary sounds of doors closing and shoes against tile marked the beginning of a tragedy. She moved methodically, checking equipment and arranging the studio, each action routine yet unknowingly marking the last moments of her daily schedule. Towels folded, mats aligned, and the studio cleared for attendees, her preparations were as meticulous as they were habitual. Every movement, while mundane to an observer, captured the calm before disruption. In those minutes, she maintained the poise and attention to detail for which she was known, entirely unaware that an intruder had already entered the property or that her day would end in violence. Later, a colleague discovered the scene, the stillness and disruption of the space immediately signalling that something had gone terribly wrong. Doors ajar, equipment displaced, and a chilling silence greeted the first arrival. Panic and confusion swept over those present as the magnitude of the situation became clear. Calls to authorities were made, and neighbours soon noticed emergency vehicles converging on the church. The dissonance between the routine fitness environment and the sudden presence of law enforcement heightened the sense of unease. Even for those familiar with the space, the scene was unrecognisable, a vivid indicator that ordinary safety had been shattered. Forensic investigators noted precise details, broken locks, signs of forced entry absent, and the methodical nature of the attack, suggesting the presence of someone both patient and calculated. Every corner was examined, every surface photographed and documented. Investigators focused on anomalies that hinted at intent rather than opportunism. The positioning of objects, the trajectory of injuries, and the absence of ordinary chaos all suggested a deliberate act. Observers remarked on the careful balance of violence and precision, a combination that defied easy interpretation. Each note and sketch collected by the team contributed to an unfolding puzzle whose pieces refused to align with conventional expectations of crime. Law enforcement officers arrived quickly, securing entrances and recording the scene with meticulous care, capturing every detail for what would become a long and unresolved investigation. Their methodical approach ensured no potential evidence was overlooked, yet the initial shock lingered. Officers documented fingerprints, footprints, and the spatial relationships of displaced items, searching for anything that could point to a suspect. Interviews began immediately, although memories were often fragmentary or contradictory. Even with advanced forensic tools, the case presented challenges uncommon in typical criminal investigations, and from the outset the detectives recognized that conventional explanations might not account for every detail of what had transpired. Witnesses recounted small anomalies, distant footsteps, a fleeting shadow, and an unsettling quiet that had fallen over the normally lively building hours earlier. Stories of subtle disturbances, doors slightly open, lights flickering, added to a growing sense of foreboding. While no one could definitively confirm the presence of the intruder before the crime, these recollections created a tapestry of uncertainty. Each account varied slightly, but collectively they painted a picture of tension in the moments leading up to the tragedy. Investigators noted these subtle signs as potential clues, while community members wrestled with the uneasy realization that ordinary spaces could conceal extraordinary danger. Autopsy reports revealed injuries that were both precise and deliberate, offering grim insight into the perpetrator's intent, while leaving many questions unanswered. The nature of the wounds indicated an experienced hand, suggesting knowledge of human vulnerability. Medical examiners documented defensive injuries alongside the primary cause of death, and while the severity was evident, the exact mechanics raised further inquiries. Specialists noted the absence of defensive trauma consistent with a struggle, implying surprise or control. Each medical observation reinforced the calculated and deliberate nature of the attack, leaving investigators with fragments of truth but no definitive resolution. Investigators pursued numerous leads, ranging from suspicious visitors to prior threats, yet each promising tip ultimately failed to provide a definitive suspect. Background checks, surveillance, and neighborhood interviews revealed patterns, but no individual fit all elements of the crime. Digital records and communications were examined, including potential online interactions, yet they yielded nothing conclusive. The absence of a clear motive complicated matters, and theories ranged widely from personal vendettas to opportunistic intrusion. Despite the diligence of law enforcement, the trail of evidence repeatedly ended in dead ends, intensifying the sense that this was a case that would resist conventional closure. The story quickly reached local and national media, amplifying public concern while casting a spotlight on the unnerving randomness of the act. Coverage emphasized the ordinary setting, the victim's dedication to the community, and the stark contrast between expected safety and sudden violence. Commentary explored motives, highlighted the procedural investigation, and showcased the reactions of neighbours and students. Public discourse speculated about the perpetrator, and the case became a focal point for wider discussion about security in seemingly benign spaces. Yet even with widespread attention, definitive answers remained elusive, creating tension between media narratives and the unanswered questions at the heart of the crime. Certain elements defied ordinary explanation: the absence of theft, the careful positioning of objects, and the methodical execution all hinted at deliberate planning beyond casual violence. Nothing of value appeared to have been removed, and nothing was found to indicate random intrusion. The care taken in executing the attack suggested foreknowledge of the victim's movements, yet no evidence clarified the intruder's identity or motive. Law enforcement and experts alike were confounded by these contradictions, which reinforced the notion that the perpetrator had acted with skill and intent, leaving behind a scene both telling and confounding, rich in clues yet sparse in resolution. The community grappled with fear and uncertainty, as students, churchgoers and instructors tried to reconcile the familiar space with the violent intrusion that had occurred. Classes were cancelled and security measures heightened, but anxiety lingered. Conversations in local cafes, homes and social media reflected collective disbelief and unease. Those who knew Bevers personally struggled to understand why someone would target a trusted instructor in a safe environment. The emotional impact created an undercurrent of vigilance and suspicion, reshaping perceptions of safety and familiarity within a space that had once been considered secure and routine. Months and years passed, yet law enforcement continued to revisit the case, seeking forensic evidence, reviewing timelines, and appealing for any new information that might surface. Advances in DNA analysis, digital tracking, and cold case methodology allowed investigators to revisit old leads with fresh eyes. Public appeals are renewed periodically, seeking witnesses who may have forgotten minor details. Despite these efforts, no definitive suspect emerged, and the investigation persisted as a testament to both dedication and frustration. The combination of meticulous documentation and unanswered questions ensured that the mystery remained active, drawing attention from professionals and enthusiasts interested in the unsolved nature of the crime. The murder remains unsolved, leaving an enduring tension between documented facts, witness recollections, and the questions that continue to surround the attack. Every piece of evidence, photographs, testimony, and forensic analysis offers insight yet falls short of closure. Scholars, criminal analysts, and journalists cite the case as emblematic of modern mysteries in ordinary spaces, emphasizing the challenge of reconciling thorough investigation with the unexplained absence of culpability. The paradox of clarity in detail but opacity in resolution leaves a lingering unease, ensuring that Missy Bevers' death continues to challenge assumptions about motive, opportunity, and the limits of detection. Even years later, the silence of the church holds a weight that no explanation has lifted, leaving questions that no evidence has yet answered. The Taos Hum, Taos, New Mexico, 1990s. A strange vibration began to unsettle certain residents, a low, continuous hum that seemed to exist just beneath the threshold of hearing. Unlike any conventional sound, it was elusive and subtle, registering more in perception than in measurable acoustics. Some residents described it as a pressure in their ears, a faint but persistent drone that seemed to ripple through walls and floors. Initially dismissed as imagination or faulty hearing, the reports gradually accumulated, hinting at something that could not be ignored. Locals noted that the hum did not follow predictable patterns, sometimes vanishing for days before returning with the same haunting consistency. Inside homes and workplaces, some sensed a persistent resonance, felt as much as heard, twisting ordinary silence into something unnatural. People reported vibrations that seemed to pass through furniture, settling uncomfortably in the chest and abdomen. Pets would react strangely, cowering or pacing as if aware of an unseen presence. For many, the hum blurred the boundary between hearing and feeling, creating a sense of unease that ordinary environmental noises could not explain. Small appliances or distant engines could not account for the tone, leading witnesses to question whether the sound was physical or psychological, real yet imperceptible to others. Stories quickly spread from neighbour to neighbour, revealing that the hum was not confined to a single location. Entire blocks reported the same phenomena, prompting informal neighbourhood discussions and cautious inquiries. Conversations in grocery stores, cafes, and town meetings repeatedly returned to the hum, its persistence creating a shared yet inexplicable experience. Individuals who'd initially felt isolated discovered others who endured the same vibrations, confirming that this was not a product of imagination. In some cases, residents formed small groups to track when and where the hum appeared, hoping to identify patterns that might explain the sound's origins. Specialists with sensitive instruments arrived, hoping to detect frequencies invisible to the unassisted ear, yet the results were often contradictory. Universities and private researchers deployed seismographs, audio recorders, and electromagnetic sensors, but the data offered no clear answers. Some instruments captured faint signals, barely distinguishable from background noise, while others registered nothing at all. Technicians adjusted calibration, repositioned sensors, and repeated measurements over weeks, but no single explanation emerged. The inconsistency of detection deepened the mystery, leaving scientists perplexed and locals simultaneously anxious and fascinated. Attempts to pinpoint the hum's source repeatedly yielded contradictions, sometimes faintly detected, sometimes absent from all recordings. Investigators mapped potential industrial, geological, and environmental contributors from distant gas pipelines to electrical infrastructure, but none matched the observed reports. Even on days when residents clearly heard or felt the hum, instruments often remained silent, suggesting a phenomenon that eluded standard measurement. This inconsistency frustrated scientific inquiry, raising questions about whether the hum was entirely external or partially dependent on perception, adding layers of uncertainty to an already confounding mystery. Those affected reported headaches, restless nights, and a strange vibration that seemed to penetrate walls, floors, and even the body. Sleep became difficult for some, with throbbing sensations lingering in quiet rooms. Concentration faltered as the persistent hum appeared without warning, and anxiety grew among those who experienced it regularly. Local physicians documented cases of insomnia, tension headaches, and unease among residents, although no physical pathology could be definitively linked to the sound. The hum's invisible persistence gave it a psychological weight, making daily life in Taos quietly oppressive for those attuned to its presence. Engineers, geologists, and acousticians offered explanations ranging from subterranean faults to industrial machinery, but none could account for the phenomenon. Some posited unusual magnetic or electromagnetic activity, while others speculated that the hum originated from distant military or communication installations. Geological explanations, including minor tectonic vibrations or underground gas emissions, were proposed but failed to align with the timing or scope of reports. The diversity of theories underscored the hum's complexity, leaving experts divided and contributing to the growing sense that it might not conform to any single natural or technological explanation. Comparable reports from other towns suggested that the hum was not unique to Taos, hinting at a more widespread, inexplicable phenomenon. Similar low-frequency sounds had been documented in places like Bristol, England, and Windsor, Ontario, often with identical patterns. Only some residents could perceive them, and measurement remained inconsistent. These parallels intrigued scientists and locals alike, suggesting that the Taos hum might be part of a larger global enigma rather than an isolated event. The fact that it appeared in small, seemingly ordinary communities emphasized its subtle yet pervasive impact on daily life. Local media covered the story, interviewing residents whose experiences ranged from fascination to near obsession with the mysterious sound. Articles detailed the personal accounts of individuals who claimed the hum interfered with work, sleep, or social life. Television segments recorded interviews with witnesses describing the sensation as vibrating in the chest, or a drone that never stops. These reports drew attention from outsiders, including researchers, journalists, and curious visitors, further amplifying the mystique of the hum. Coverage also fueled debates over credibility, with skeptics suggesting it was an auditory illusion while others insisted on the sound's undeniable presence. The hum continued in unpredictable cycles, appearing and disappearing without warning, frustrating every attempt at systematic study. Residents learned to anticipate its return, noting subtle environmental triggers such as wind patterns, temperature changes, or silence that seemed to amplify the sensation. Yet these correlations were inconsistent, providing only fleeting guidance to those who tried to track the phenomenon. Its intermittent nature reinforced the sense of a living, elusive presence, as if the hum had an intelligence or autonomy of its own. Each reappearance reignited both fear and curiosity, leaving the community in a perpetual state of unsettled vigilance. Debates arose over whether the hum was physical or psychological, yet many witnesses insisted on its undeniable presence. Even with scientific equipment failing to detect it consistently, those affected described tangible sensations of vibration and pressure, suggesting that perception alone could not fully explain the experience. Some theorists proposed a form of sensory resonance, unique to certain individuals, while others suggested hidden physical sources yet undiscovered. These discussions underscored the tension between objective measurement and subjective experience, highlighting the challenge of documenting phenomena that straddle both realms. Community members compiled anecdotes, audio samples, and observation logs, creating a fragmented but compelling record of the phenomenon. Diaries, recordings, and collaborative mapping of hum occurrences offered a form of citizen science, attempting to track something inherently elusive. While no definitive patterns emerged, the collection of accounts painted a portrait of a small town subtly gripped by a shared, inexplicable disturbance. Over time, these records became crucial reference points for researchers and curious visitors alike, providing tangible evidence of an otherwise intangible phenomenon. The sound remains an enigma, experienced by some and imperceptible to others, resisting every attempt at explanation. For decades, Taos has remained a town quietly divided between those attuned to the hum and those untouched by it. Scientific study continues sporadically, but the phenomenon defies easy classification, existing at the intersection of perception, physics, and human experience. Each new report renews the mystery, ensuring that the hum retains its grip on both the imagination and reality of those who encounter it. Though equipment falls silent and theories falter, the hum lingers in the ears and minds of those who hear it, an invisible sound with no origin. The Hinterkaifeck-like murders of Villisca, Iowa, 1912. The morning revealed a quiet town shattered by an unthinkable crime that had erased an entire family from their home. Villisca, a small farming community, had woken to a sense of dread that spread faster than any message could travel. Inside the Moore household, an unimaginable scene awaited, one that would haunt the town for generations. Word quickly travelled along the dusty roads and narrow sidewalks, reaching neighbours who could hardly comprehend the horror of 6 family members and 2 visiting children found dead in their own beds. The shock was palpable, leaving everyone unsure how to even begin describing what had occurred. Inside the modest house, objects lay undisturbed yet lifeless, the scene eerily composed as if time itself had paused. The beds bore the bodies of the family and the visitors, each face frozen in final expressions of fear and confusion. Household items remained in place, as if the murderer had moved with careful precision, leaving a puzzle rather than a chaotic scene. The murder weapon, an axe found in the home, carried no fingerprints or clues beyond the grisly results. Even the windows, tightly closed, failed to explain the perpetrator's entry or exit, deepening the mystery for investigators. Every corner seemed to whisper questions that no one could answer. Josiah Moore, his wife, their 4 children, and 2 young visitors were ordinary lives entwined with tragedy, now frozen in horror. The Moores had been respected members of the community, known for their industriousness and quiet lives. The children were playful and well-behaved, their futures abruptly erased in one unthinkable night. Paul and Ina Moore, the visiting children, had been welcomed into the home with warmth. their presence now a haunting reminder of innocence lost. Every detail about the family amplified the tragedy. Their routines, their meals, their laughter, all now silenced forever. In such a small town, the loss was not just personal. It rippled through the fabric of the community itself. Local townsfolk felt an uneasy silence that drew them toward the house, their apprehension growing with every cautious step. People paused at the fence line, noticing the absence of light and movement that was usually ordinary for a Sunday morning. Some approached hesitantly, unsure if they would witness something beyond comprehension. Doors were tested, windows examined, yet all efforts to peer into the house revealed only the chilling stillness inside. The streets, normally filled with the sounds of animals and chores, were eerily quiet, as if the entire town held its breath in anticipation of understanding what had befallen the Moore family. Officers arrived at a puzzle of locked doors, scattered items, and a community desperate for explanations that would not come easily. Law enforcement had never confronted a scene of such inexplicable violence in Villisca, and their presence only intensified the town's anxious atmosphere. They catalogued the room-by-room details, noting the orientation of bodies, the placement of furniture, and the almost ritualistic positioning of the axe. Despite meticulous documentation, nothing revealed a clear motive or suspect. Every step into the home seemed to invite more questions than answers, as though the house itself held onto its secrets with deliberate intent. Rumours spread rapidly through Villisca, colouring speculation with whispered theories that remained grounded in facts. Families discussed the oddities they had observed, from footprints leading to the house to doors that were locked in ways that made no sense. Some speculated about wandering strangers or drifters passing through, while others considered personal vendettas or jealousies, all anchored in the reality that such a tragedy had actually occurred. The town, small and tightly knit, found itself divided between fear and fascination, struggling to reconcile the known details with the unimaginable scope of the crime. Certain details defied simple reasoning. The doors were locked from the inside, yet entry had clearly been forced in other ways. Investigators noted footprints in the snow outside, but none matched any residents or known visitors. A missing key, unexplained sounds reported by neighbours, and subtle signs of someone having lingered in the home the night prior suggested an intimate knowledge of the family's routines. Even mundane elements, a window slightly ajar, a lamp positioned oddly, added layers of mystery. The juxtaposition of order and horror intensified the sense that the house itself bore witness to events far beyond ordinary criminal behaviour. Investigators questioned those nearby, following leads that vanished into dead ends and witnesses who offered only partial insight. Townspeople recounted seeing lights or figures moving near the property on nights prior, but their recollections were inconsistent and often contradictory. Some spoke of distant travellers, while others recalled a local who had quarrelled with the family, yet none could provide concrete evidence. Authorities meticulously examined each tip, yet the trail dissolved at every turn, as if the very truth refused to emerge. Each new witness added to the tapestry of suspicion, but nothing definitively revealed who had carried out such a heinous act. Comparisons were drawn to the Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany, unsettling in their parallels yet separated by ocean and decades. Both crimes involved a family found dead in their home, victims killed with a bladed instrument, and strange details that suggested the perpetrator had lingered before or after the act. Scholars and investigators studying patterns of unsolved murders often referenced these cases in tandem, noting the eerie similarities in timing, method, and the psychological impact on local communities. While Villisca was unique in its own historical and social context, the shadow of a similar crime across the globe only amplified the unsettling resonance of what had occurred in 1912. Every suspected motive and named individual seemed insufficient, leaving the case suspended in a limbo of unanswered questions. Authorities examined neighbours, former employees and acquaintances with grudging thoroughness, yet all avenues led to inconclusive results. No confession, no undeniable evidence, and no witness testimony could illuminate the truth behind the murders. Each new lead seemed plausible on the surface, but ultimately failed to withstand scrutiny. The deeper the investigation delved, the more intangible the case became, a puzzle without corner pieces, leaving Villisca residents with nothing but speculation and unease. Newspapers chronicled the grisly details, magnifying the horror while also documenting the careful efforts to solve the crime. journalists from across Iowa descended upon the town, their coverage shaping both public perception and investigative pressure. Reports detailed the positions of victims, the mysterious locks, and the missing footprints, emphasizing the inexplicable nature of the crime. While some media accounts veered into sensationalism, others maintained a strict adherence to facts, preserving a record that would later serve as a critical reference for historians and amateur sleuths. The public fascination further entrenched the case in collective memory. Years of searching, interviews, and reports failed to reveal the true perpetrator, leaving Villisca haunted by uncertainty. Subsequent investigations, even decades later, uncovered little beyond what was already documented. Advances in forensic science, though promising, could not penetrate the veil of time that obscured critical details. Families and researchers alike revisited the case repeatedly, piecing together what could be known while acknowledging what could never be confirmed. The murders became a haunting template for unsolved domestic tragedies, a cautionary tale of brutality intertwined with enigma. Over time, the house and its story have persisted in memory, a grim reminder of lives abruptly ended under inexplicable circumstances. Local tours, historical records, and dedicated research maintain a connection to the past, ensuring that the Moore family's story remains visible in public consciousness. Artifacts, photographs, and newspaper clippings have been preserved, but they provide no answers, only the chilling context of a community confronted with incomprehensible violence. The house itself, though long since vacated, continues to evoke curiosity and fear, standing as a silent monument to an unsolved nightmare. Long after the town slept, the Villisca house remained a silent witness, guarding secrets no one would ever fully uncover. The Boy in the Box, Fox Chase, Pennsylvania, 1957. A worn wooden box resting beneath the underbrush revealed a secret that would haunt Fox Chase for generations. On February 25, 1957, a passerby discovered the box in a wooded area, partially concealed by dead leaves and overgrown brush. Inside lay the body of a young boy, roughly 4 to 6 years old, emaciated and dressed in worn clothing. No identification accompanied him, and the markings on his body hinted at a life of neglect or abuse. The shocking discovery immediately transformed the quiet neighborhood into a focal point of fear, speculation, and an urgency to understand how such cruelty could go unnoticed. Police catalogued the scene meticulously, noting the boy's clothing, hair colour, and the chilling lack of any personal items. Investigators recorded measurements, sketches, and photographs, trying to preserve evidence that might point to his identity. The box itself, though ordinary in construction, had been chosen deliberately, suggesting premeditation. Officers canvassed the surrounding streets, hoping that someone might have noticed a child in distress or an unusual visitor to the area. Each passing hour without a lead intensified the urgency of the search. Every clue, however small, seemed to multiply the mystery rather than resolve it, leaving a lingering tension in the town. Voices from the neighborhood carried unease and disbelief, as the incomprehensible cruelty of the discovery rippled through the community. Families whispered to each other about missing children, while others wondered how a child could remain hidden from all local eyes. Parents walked their own children with renewed vigilance, and the collective imagination of the town began constructing scenarios both plausible and terrifying. Even those with no direct connection to the boy felt the gravity of the case pressing against the borders of their daily lives. The presence of such brutality in a seemingly ordinary neighborhood left the community with a lasting sense of vulnerability. Medical examiners determined the boy had endured severe trauma, and the evidence suggested he had been placed deliberately to conceal his presence. The coroner's report described bruising and other marks indicating repeated harm, yet there were no indications of prolonged illness. Experts theorized that the child had suffered abuse before his death, and the careful placement of his body in a secluded box pointed to an awareness of wrongdoing. Each finding deepened the horror of the case, leaving investigators to speculate about the identity and intentions of the perpetrator. The lack of any direct evidence made the boy's fate all the more haunting. Speculations swirled around missing children, orphaned families, and possible abductions, but each thread led to frustrating dead ends. Law enforcement followed every lead, from unreported disappearances in the region to tips about suspicious individuals passing through Fox Chase. Each line of inquiry produced no definitive connections, and the boy remained unidentified. Citizens and journalists alike began to theorize wildly, debating whether he had been abandoned, kidnapped, or even the victim of a stranger from outside the community. Despite the intensity of the search, every answer seemed to spawn more questions, leaving a sense of incompleteness that only compounded the town's unease. Several locals recalled sightings of unfamiliar figures, yet none could offer details that would definitively explain the boy's fate. Witness statements varied in reliability, and recollections often conflicted with each other, producing more confusion than clarity. Some described a man seen walking near the woods carrying a heavy bundle. Others claimed to have heard a child crying days before the discovery. Despite the inconsistencies, each tip was pursued with diligence, yet the trail seemed to vanish into the dense thickets surrounding the area. With each passing day, the boy's identity became more elusive, and the questions surrounding his life and death loomed larger than ever. Local newspapers ran gripping headlines, each article weaving fact with the collective anxiety that gripped the wider community. Photographs of the box and police sketches of the boy were circulated, and the story drew national attention. Readers across the country debated the possible circumstances of the child's life, each theory more unsettling than the last. Journalistic coverage amplified the tension in Fox Chase, ensuring that the town's ordinary routines were overshadowed by speculation and fear. The boy in the box became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of the fragile safety of everyday life in the eyes of a world that suddenly seemed less secure. Artists' sketches were distributed across the region, but recognition never came, and every lead faded into silence. Attempts to match the boy with missing children from nearby towns or states proved futile. For weeks, investigators hoped that someone would identify him, but the anonymity of the boy became a defining feature of the case. Each passing month only emphasized the impossibility of his origin, and the notion that he'd been deliberately hidden by someone familiar with the area added a chilling dimension. Public interest remained high, yet frustration mounted as the boy's identity continued to evade all efforts to uncover it. Over the years, law enforcement revisited the case repeatedly, applying newer forensic methods that promised answers yet delivered only mystery. Advances in fingerprint analysis, dental records, and even early DNA testing brought new opportunities to solve the case, yet no definitive breakthrough was ever achieved. Each re-examination highlighted the depth of uncertainty surrounding the boy's life and death, reinforcing the enduring puzzle that had begun more than half a century earlier. Investigators remained committed, but the passage of time had eroded memories and evidence, leaving only fragments of a story that refused to be fully told. The case left an indelible mark, inspiring books, documentaries, and continued fascination with the boy who never had a name. True crime authors and local historians documented every known detail, attempting to preserve the narrative for posterity. The boy in the box became a symbol of both innocence lost and the limitations of investigative work, a reminder of the unanswered questions that linger in human society. Each new retelling revived public interest, drawing attention to the fragility of safety and the persistence of mystery in even the most seemingly ordinary communities. Every discovery seemed to deepen the uncertainty. Why had he been abandoned, and who could have orchestrated such a calculated concealment? Investigators pondered whether he had been deliberately isolated, placed where no passerby might notice, or perhaps hidden by someone who lived nearby. The more authorities learned about his circumstances, the less certain they became about his origins. Every clue, no matter how small, seemed to raise further questions, and each piece of forensic or anecdotal evidence only emphasized the limits of understanding. The boy's anonymity remained a central enigma, one that refused to fade with time. DNA testing, genealogical research, and renewed investigative attention offered tantalizing glimpses, but the puzzle of his identity remained unsolved. Modern forensic techniques gave hope for closure, suggesting distant familial connections or potential matches in historical records. However, despite these advancements, the boy's lineage and the circumstances of his life before death could not be confirmed. Each scientific analysis produced new insights, yet none provided definitive answers. The story of the boy in the box endured as both a cautionary tale and an unsolved enigma, attracting generations of investigators and amateur sleuths who sought to piece together the fragments left behind. Generations have now grown up with this mystery, the boy in the box becoming a silent emblem of unanswered questions and human cruelty. Schools, local historians, and crime enthusiasts reference the case as an example of unresolved tragedy, and the site of discovery retains an eerie significance. The story resonates beyond the immediate geography of Fox Chase, symbolizing both the fragility of innocence and the persistence of human curiosity. It remains a subject of study, speculation, and mourning. The boy's identity and story a haunting reminder that some truths can elude even the most diligent search. Even now, the voice of Fox Chase seems to whisper that some secrets refuse to be uncovered, no matter how long the search endures. The Salem UFO sighting, Salem, Massachusetts, 1952.
The quiet streets of Salem, Massachusetts, in the early months of 1952 were suddenly pierced by reports that defied explanation, as police officers claimed to have observed a fast-moving silent craft cutting across the night sky. On a clear February evening, patrolmen on routine duty described a luminous object hovering and darting with movements unlike any conventional aircraft they had ever encountered. The object's sudden accelerations and abrupt changes in direction left witnesses momentarily frozen, their training offering no framework to categorize what they were seeing, while the community stirred with whispers of the impossible. Eyewitness testimony was collected systematically, each statement carefully noting the object's speed, shape, and the way its light glowed against the darkness. Officers recalled the craft's metallic sheen, yet it reflected no discernible markings, insignia, or navigation lights, making identification by conventional aviation standards impossible. Residents who glimpsed it from their homes described a strange calm in the air, as if the presence of the object absorbed ambient sound, and even distant traffic noises seemed to dim. These accounts were corroborated in police logs, lending unusual credibility to a story often relegated to rumour. Local newspapers of the time documented the incident with cautious curiosity, carefully reporting the officers' statements while including expert opinions from nearby airports, all of whom could offer no rational explanation. Air traffic controllers confirmed that no scheduled flights or experimental aircraft were in the area, and the US Air Force would later note the sighting in early UFO files. Despite such attention, the event slipped into the shadowy corners of Salem's history, noted by researchers but never fully explained, leaving a lingering tension between documentation and doubt. What made the sightings particularly unsettling to the police was the object's movement, which contradicted known aerodynamics. Officers described sudden bursts of speed and sharp turns that would have been impossible for any craft powered by 1950s technology. Some patrolmen even noted brief moments when the object appeared to hover silently at angles that suggested deliberate observation. The combination of speed, maneuverability, and silence confounded trained observers, who insisted that no terrestrial aircraft could perform the movements they witnessed without leaving some trace of exhaust or sound. In the days following the sighting, additional reports emerged from nearby towns, with citizens claiming to see a similar glowing object streaking across the night sky. While not all reports came from trained observers, the consistency in descriptions was remarkable, from the colour of the lights to the object's rapid, sudden accelerations. Local authorities attempted to consolidate the accounts, hoping to find a pattern that might point to a conventional explanation, but the reports defied synchronization with any known flight paths or natural phenomena, deepening the air of mystery. Meteorologists of the era were consulted to rule out unusual atmospheric or astronomical events, from meteor showers to reflections of ground-based light sources. None of these explanations matched the officers' accounts, particularly the object's abrupt stops and starts and its seemingly intelligent navigation. Some researchers speculated on misidentified planets or stars, yet the witnesses were adamant that the movement, speed, and brightness were unlike any celestial body. Their insistence highlighted a strange intersection of credibility and the inexplicable, where trained observation met a phenomenon that resisted rational classification. Despite the thorough documentation, the incident sparked debate within Salem and among UFO researchers nationwide. Skeptics argued that atmospheric anomalies or optical illusions could explain the sightings, while proponents pointed to the multiple trained witnesses, the precise timing, and the official police reports. The object remained untraceable, leaving only fragmented accounts and official notes.
Investigators who revisited the case decades later continued to highlight the perplexity of the reports, emphasizing that the object's behavior did not align with any known aircraft, experimental or commercial, during the early 1950s. The local community was affected in subtle ways, as conversations about the event lingered long after the initial reports. Residents recalled seeing the police scanning the skies with binoculars, noting points of light and occasionally gesturing in disbelief at movements they could not explain. For a town already steeped in history and legend, the UFO sighting added another layer of unease, blending the familiar cobblestone streets and colonial architecture with a sense that something entirely unknown had touched the night sky. The air of unresolved mystery became a quiet companion to everyday life. Police logs from the night offer a meticulous record of the officers' observations, detailing times, angles, and distances in a precision that suggests earnest documentation rather than embellishment. Each entry notes the object's luminous quality, estimating it at several hundred feet above the ground, and records its trajectory across multiple city blocks. The absence of any physical evidence beyond the observations, no landing traces, sound, or physical residue, heightened the difficulty of explaining the encounter. The craft seemed to exist in a liminal space between presence and absence, leaving only the impressions of those who saw it. The event took on a broader cultural significance as the UFO phenomenon captured national attention in the early 1950s. Reports like Salem's were catalogued alongside other sightings in the US, forming part of the early governmental effort to track unexplained aerial phenomena. Yet, while some cases were eventually explained as weather balloons, aircraft misidentifications, or astronomical events, the Salem sighting resisted classification. Its detailed documentation by professional law enforcement officers ensured that it remained a curious anomaly, one that contributed to growing public interest in UFOs without ever losing the air of authenticity. Scholars and researchers revisiting the case have noted subtle consistencies in the descriptions of the object's shape, light intensity, and behavior. These consistencies suggest that witnesses observed a singular phenomenon rather than a series of coincidental misperceptions. Photographs from the period are absent, likely due to the rapidity of the event and the limited technology available to the officers, leaving the written reports as the only concrete record. Yet the absence of visual evidence has paradoxically reinforced the story's enigmatic quality, compelling later generations to ponder what could have moved with such precision and silence above a small American town. Eyewitness testimony has also been scrutinized for psychological or sociological factors, as some experts suggest that public attention to UFOs can shape memory or interpretation. Still, the professional and repeated observations of trained police officers complicate such arguments. Researchers point out that the officers' descriptions include technical details unlikely to be fabricated, such as angular velocity, estimated speed, and relative positioning of city streets in relation to the object. These elements add weight to the reports and maintain the sense that the event defies ordinary explanation. Modern investigations have revisited Salem's archives, cross-referencing the 1952 reports with meteorological, astronomical, and aviation records, yet no conclusive explanation emerges. The Air Force's later Project Blue Book, while investigating thousands of sightings nationwide, listed the Salem case among unexplained incidents, emphasizing that the observations could not be matched with known aircraft or natural phenomena. This enduring lack of resolution reinforces the feeling that the event occupies a space beyond conventional understanding, where evidence exists but remains stubbornly unclassified. For decades, the story has persisted in Salem's local memory, occasionally resurfacing in historical retrospectives and UFO literature. Oral histories capture residents' reflections, including the strange hush that fell over the streets and the unshakable impression left on those who witnessed the lights darting above their rooftops. The event has become part of the town's layered history, intertwined with tales of witchcraft and maritime mystery, forming a quiet, lingering tension between ordinary life and the intrusion of something wholly inexplicable. Even today, researchers and enthusiasts return to Salem, reviewing old police logs and interviewing descendants of the original witnesses, attempting to trace the object's path with modern technology. Yet, the fundamental mystery endures. A fast-moving, silent craft seen by trained observers, meticulously documented yet wholly unexplained, floats in the historical record without resolution. it remains a reminder that some events resist closure, lingering at the edges of knowledge where curiosity meets the unknown. No report, calculation, or testimony has ever provided an answer to what truly passed silently over Salem that night. The disappearance of Brianna Maitland, Montgomery, Vermont, 2004. On a cold March evening in Montgomery, Vermont, Brianna Maitland's routine shift at the Maple Ridge Inn ended abruptly, leaving only her car backed into the abandoned building with headlights still piercing the night. The scene was quiet except for the faint hum of the vehicle's electrical systems, and the surrounding snow reflected a pale glow that seemed almost unnatural. Inside, the inn's rooms had emptied of their usual warmth, and outside, the darkness carried a heavy stillness that would be remembered by all who came across the abandoned car. For the first witnesses, the sight was not only alarming but inexplicably haunting, hinting at a disappearance that defied easy explanation. The town's quiet streets and snow-dusted hills seemed to hold a hushed tension, amplifying the sense of something, or someone, missing from the familiar landscape. Montgomery, with its narrow roads and sparsely scattered homes, was the kind of town where everyone knew one another, and yet the absence of Brianna's presence seemed to unsettle even the most stoic residents. Streetlights flickered in the cold, casting long shadows across the snowbanks, and the usual rhythm of small-town life was replaced by anxious whispers and glances toward darkened windows, as though the land itself acknowledged that a mystery now lived among them. Hours before she vanished, Brianna moved through familiar corridors and roads, exchanging brief greetings with co-workers who would later replay every detail in search of overlooked clues. Her routine was ordinary, marked by the kind of small interactions that go unnoticed until they are the last recorded moments of a person's life. Friends remembered her cheerful demeanour, the way she balanced work and school, and the errands she ran in town, each detail suddenly amplified by the haunting question of what had intervened between routine and disappearance. Even the familiar roads seemed to adopt a menacing quality, as if shadows lingered longer than they should. A passerby stumbled upon the car's eerie placement, angled deep into the abandoned structure, its interior dimly lit and the engine long since silent. The headlights remained on, throwing pale beams onto the cracked walls of the Maple Ridge building and revealing the desolation within. No sign of forced entry or struggle could be observed, and the careful positioning of the vehicle suggested deliberation, though no one could determine whether the placement was intentional or incidental. Those who approached were struck by the stark contrast between the car's illumination and the surrounding void, a light cast into a darkness that seemed to swallow any sense of normalcy. Beneath the pale glow of streetlights, meticulous photographs were taken and every item catalogued, as authorities struggled to reconstruct a timeline that refused to take shape. Gloves and notebooks were used to preserve fingerprints and impressions, yet every piece of evidence led to more questions than answers. The cold seeped into bones, and officers noted the unusual quiet that hung over the area, broken only by the crunch of snow underfoot. Even the smallest detail, a discarded jacket, the angle of a windshield wiper, became a focal point for an investigation that quickly encountered its limits. Families and friends formed search parties that traced frozen paths and narrow roads, each footprint a stark reminder of the vanished presence they sought. Groups combed the forests, calling out into the wind that swept over the hills and through the evergreens, hoping for a reply that never came. The searches were methodical yet desperate, moving from familiar paths to remote hollows and abandoned structures, each step a confrontation with the unnerving emptiness left in Brianna's absence. The night deepened, and the snow-muffled sound, creating a world where silence itself became a signal of the unknown. Reports in regional newspapers chronicled the strange scene, documenting statements while hinting at fleeting national attention that would soon recede. Headlines were cautious, describing the discovery of the car and the ongoing investigation, while emphasizing that no concrete leads had emerged. Journalists highlighted the eeriness of the abandoned Maple Ridge building and the still-lit headlights, conveying the sense of unease that had settled over Montgomery. Coverage provided a broader stage for the mystery, but offered no resolution, only a record of events that only deepened the shadow cast by the disappearance. Every lead, from possible hitchhiking to reported sightings, was recorded, yet the absence of tangible evidence left each theory suspended between plausibility and impossibility. Tips arrived from neighbours, strangers, and online inquiries, but none yielded physical proof. investigators carefully catalogued every mention of a vehicle seen on rural roads, every reported sound or movement, but the threads dissipated into thin air. Even plausible explanations, someone leaving town, an accident, or a misadventure, failed to account for the precise circumstances of the abandoned car or the headlights still glowing, leaving the event lodged firmly in the realm of unresolved mystery. Long, empty, and shrouded in shadows, the Maple Ridge building seemed to hold its secrets, its peeling walls and silent corridors echoing the mystery of the disappearance. Doors creaked under their own weight, windows reflected fractured light, and the hollow interior seemed almost to observe the visitors who dared enter. Residents spoke of the building in hushed tones, a place that had been abandoned for years yet now held a new significance as the last known location connected to Brianna Maitland. The structure became both landmark and riddle, an unmoving witness to a night that had not yet released its story. Snowy fields and dense woodland around the town presented nearly insurmountable obstacles, with paths often leading only to frozen silence and fading tracks. Searchers scoured hills and valleys, scanning the white expanses for signs of disturbance, but the winter landscape was unrelenting in its concealment. Animals' tracks and shifting snowdrifts offered misleading clues, and harsh weather forced repeated retreats. Each failed attempt amplified the town's anxiety, illustrating the difficulty of uncovering the truth in a region where isolation magnified the unknown, and every shadow hinted at what could not be seen. The void left behind seemed to stretch endlessly across the town, every unanswered question intensifying the unresolved tension that clung to the hills and roads. Families and friends replayed the timeline of Brianna's movements, searching for overlooked moments, but time offered no clarity. The absence itself became a presence, one that shaped the rhythm of daily life and reminded everyone that a single disappearance could transform the ordinary into the uncanny. Even the familiar roadways, once considered safe and mundane, were now touched by the spectre of uncertainty. Whispers in homes and stores reflected how the unexplained disappearance reshaped a town once defined by familiarity and quiet routine. Teachers, shopkeepers, and passers-by spoke in careful tones, avoiding speculation but unable to ignore the unease lingering in their own voices. The community's collective consciousness had been altered, with ordinary routines now shadowed by vigilance and hesitation. Every nightfall was a reminder that somewhere, perhaps along familiar routes, something had gone irretrievably wrong, leaving a quiet yet insistent question mark over Montgomery. Search logs, witness statements, and official documentation form a trail of factual breadcrumbs that leads to nothing certain about Brianna Maitland's final hours. Investigators have catalogued each clue, each tip, and every small discovery, but none have resolved the mystery. The documented details, dates, times, locations, remain fixed, yet the story itself is open-ended, existing as a series of fragments that refuse to coalesce into a satisfying narrative. The absence of resolution continues to shape the perception of the event, maintaining its place among the small town's most chilling mysteries. Somewhere along those cold Vermont roads, the faint glow of headlights may have faded into silence, yet the question of what truly became of Brianna Maitland lingers like a shadow that refuses to disappear. The Hopkinsville Goblins, Hopkinsville, Kentucky, 1955. A sudden flash of light reflected off the farmhouse windows, revealing shapes that defied explanation just beyond the edge of the tree line near Kelly, Kentucky. The night of August 21st, 1955 began as any other summer evening in this quiet rural community, yet it would soon become one of the most infamous encounters in UFO and cryptid lore. Residents described small, humanoid figures with glowing eyes moving with an unnatural speed across the yard, their presence punctuated by fleeting shadows that seemed almost to dance in the dark. From the first glimpse, the ordinary rhythms of the evening were replaced by disbelief and a growing sense of imminent danger. The summer night was heavy and still, the surrounding woods dense and shadowed, giving a sense of isolation that made every sound and movement sharper, more urgent. The farmhouse, where the Sutton family lived along with visiting relatives, was surrounded by cornfields and stretches of unbroken forest, amplifying the unease. The chirping of crickets and the distant calls of owls were suddenly drowned by the tension in the air, as if nature itself had paused to witness the intrusion. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig seemed magnified, producing a heightened awareness that left the family on constant alert. One of the visiting relatives glimpsed small figures with glowing eyes, moving unnaturally close to the family's porch while the wind stirred the nearby trees. These initial sightings occurred in quick succession, brief flashes that prompted a mixture of curiosity and terror. Witnesses reported the figures darting from shadow to shadow, their proportions and movements unlike any known animal or human. The initial shock was quickly replaced by fear, as the presence of something inexplicably alien became undeniably clear. Doors slammed and lights flickered as the family attempted to scare the creatures away, their shouts cutting through the tense, almost tangible darkness. Chairs were overturned and lamps were swung toward the figures, while some members of the household grabbed firearms, hoping to defend themselves from what seemed at once real and unreal. Despite these efforts, the creatures persisted, retreating only to reappear moments later in another corner of the yard. The family's terror was heightened by the surreal quality of the figures' movements, rapid and unpredictable, leaving no opportunity to assess whether they were merely playful, hostile, or something beyond comprehension. Patrolmen arriving on the scene carefully noted the surroundings, observing strange movements and lights that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Law enforcement reports document that the officers witnessed flashes of motion around the property, though the figures themselves eluded capture. Despite searching the perimeter, the officers could find no tangible evidence beyond footprints in the soft ground and fleeting impressions on the grass. Their statements reinforced the uncanny nature of the encounter, leaving investigators with a mix of intrigue and frustration at the lack of definitive proof. Those in charge of investigating noted subtle traces around the farmhouse that hinted at the creature's physical presence, including small, human-like footprints measuring roughly 6 to 9 inches in length and spaced in unusual, irregular patterns. Officers carefully photographed the impressions in the soft earth, as well as faint scorch marks on the lawn where witnesses claimed lights had hovered. These marks, though minor, were considered significant because they aligned with descriptions from multiple witnesses and suggested the beings had been more than mere illusions or shadows. Even in the absence of tangible capture, these observations added a weight of credibility to an encounter otherwise defined by fleeting sightings. Branches snapped under unseen weight, shadows twisted across the yard, and intermittent rustling created an oppressive atmosphere that kept every observer on edge. Even the family's dogs reacted in unusual ways, barking at the unseen entities and then retreating with cautious hesitation. The interplay of light from lamps and flashlights with the darkness of the trees produced fleeting illusions, but witnesses insist the figures themselves were visible, small and humanoid, glowing with an otherworldly luminescence that defied natural explanation. Reports quickly circulated beyond the county, chronicling the bizarre encounter in national newspapers while capturing the fascination of UFO enthusiasts and paranormal investigators alike. Headlines described goblins or aliens surrounding the farmhouse, often embellishing the narrative but always referencing the real, corroborated sightings by multiple witnesses. The incident drew attention from both skeptics and believers, cementing the story as a cultural touchstone in discussions of unexplained phenomena. Even decades later, the Hopkinsville goblins remain a reference point for encounters that blend fear, the inexplicable, and the rural American night. Multiple adults, including both family members and law enforcement, described what they had seen with consistent details that confounded skeptics and investigators alike. Testimonies align on the size, appearance, and behavior of the creatures, with reports noting their small stature, elongated limbs, and piercing reflective eyes. The fact that trained officers corroborated the sightings adds a layer of credibility that differentiates the event from ordinary hoaxes or misidentifications. Each statement contributes to the enduring mystery, underscoring a confrontation with the unknown that cannot be easily dismissed. The beings were consistently described as small in stature, with elongated limbs and luminous eyes, moving with sudden bursts of energy that seemed impossible for any earthly animal. Witnesses recounted the creature's ability to dart quickly from one location to another, seemingly appearing and disappearing at will, heightening the sense of unreality. Their glowing eyes were described as fixed and unblinking, casting an eerie light in the darkened yard. While their movements suggested intelligence and intent, leaving observers unsure whether they were being watched, tested, or merely observed. The ordeal stretched over several hours, with the figures appearing repeatedly around the property, leaving witnesses drained and struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. Families took turns keeping watch by the windows, tracking movement and signalling to one another, while the intermittent appearances of the creatures prevented any sense of safety. Exhaustion combined with heightened fear created a surreal experience, as ordinary time seemed to warp under the weight of the extraordinary. Every fleeting glimpse reinforced the sense that the night itself had been transformed into a realm where the familiar laws of reality no longer applied. Experts later debated explanations ranging from hoaxes and misidentified wildlife to more extraordinary possibilities, yet no single theory accounted for the persistence and detail of the sightings. Some suggested owls or other nocturnal animals might have caused illusions, while others speculated that the family may have misinterpreted shadows or reflections. Researchers in ufology and cryptozoology examined the case, acknowledging the credibility of witnesses but lamenting the lack of physical evidence. Even with decades of scrutiny, the incident remains unresolved, a rare documented case in which multiple adults were terrified by entities that never left behind tangible proof. The events became woven into local folklore, inspiring articles, books, and documentaries while cementing Hopkinsville's place in the annals of mysterious American encounters. Festivals, reenactments, and tourist attention now celebrate the legend, yet the true nature of the night's events continues to elude definition. Locals recount the story with reverence and caution, blending fact with legend, and the farmhouse itself is remembered less for its architecture than as a site where the ordinary and extraordinary collided. Footprints, fleeting glimpses, and lingering fear remained the only tangible remnants of the night, as authorities were unable to capture or definitively identify the creatures. Decades later, researchers still debate whether the event was extraterrestrial, cryptid-related, or some unknown phenomenon, but the original testimonies remain consistent, echoing across time as a testament to an encounter that defies logical explanation. No physical evidence survived, yet the intensity of the reported sightings continues to captivate and unsettle all who study the event. The small figures retreated into the darkness, leaving a quiet that was almost alive, as if the forest itself remembered their presence and refused to reveal their secrets. The Westfield Watcher, Westfield, New Jersey, 2014. Boxes were still stacked in the corners when the first letter arrived, its precise typed words claiming that the Carpenter family was being watched from nearby shadows. The message was unsettling not only because it referenced details of the home that only someone observing closely could know, but also because its tone suggested a patient, lingering presence, one that could silently monitor every movement. At first, the family tried to dismiss it as a prank or a mistake, folding the letter and placing it on the counter, yet a sense of unease had already taken root, twisting the familiar air of the new home into something sharper and more vigilant. The quiet avenues of Westfield stretched in neat rows with tree-lined sidewalks and historic homes, a setting that normally offered comfort but now felt oddly oppressive. Streetlights cast warm halos over the pavement, but each shadow seemed to carry a weight, as though the houses themselves were quietly observing the occupants. The Carpenter family, eager to settle into their new surroundings, could not have anticipated that a place meant for safety and domestic stability would become the stage for a slow, psychological siege, where ordinary objects and familiar spaces began to take on an unfamiliar, menacing quality. Paper crinkled under careful fingers as the family unfolded the note describing details only someone observing the house could know, sending an immediate chill through the living room. The words referenced rooms, windows, and routines, revealing an intimate awareness that was impossible to explain. The carefully typed message avoided personal insults, yet the precision of its observations implied a calculated intrusion. Reading it, the family felt the presence of someone or something close by, invisible yet remarkably attentive, a realization that reshaped the contours of their home and the comfort it once promised. Subsequent letters arrived at regular intervals, each escalating in specificity and menace, suggesting the unseen presence had a patient, methodical intent. Envelopes were slipped under doors, left in the mailbox, or occasionally placed where the family could not immediately locate them. Some contained drawings, others offered subtle threats or warnings, all written in the same typeface, hinting at a deliberate effort to maintain consistency and control over the unfolding fear. With each new delivery, the Carpenter family felt the ordinary walls of the home closing in, and their sense of security eroded by the invisible observer whose presence could not be confirmed. Sleep became fragile and routines fragmented as anxiety and paranoia threaded through conversations, glances toward windows, and every sound echoing from the world outside. Even the act of preparing meals, washing dishes, or answering the door felt fraught with potential observation. Family members noticed shadows crossing the edges of their vision, the creak of a floorboard outside, or the subtle movement of curtains, each event magnified by the knowledge that someone or something was watching. These small, disorienting incidents compounded over time, creating an atmosphere in which ordinary life became unpredictable and the familiar transformed into a source of tension. Detectives examined envelopes, postal marks, and handwriting samples, noting consistencies that pointed to a single author, yet frustratingly revealed no traceable identity. Investigators documented the letters meticulously, photographing each page and retaining all envelopes as evidence. Despite these efforts, no fingerprints, DNA, or postmark patterns yielded a lead. Officers occasionally patrolled the neighborhood, observing from vehicles and front lawns, yet the person responsible never appeared during these watches. The investigation highlighted a reality both ordinary and extraordinary. Someone was orchestrating fear with precision, yet remained completely elusive. Experts noted that the letters often contained subtle markers suggesting careful planning. The typewriter used left consistent indentations, small smudges hinted at hurried handling, and some envelopes bore faint postmarks that, while not traceable to a single location, aligned with areas of Westfield reachable within minutes. Investigators also observed that certain phrases recurred across multiple letters, suggesting deliberate psychological design meant to cultivate unease. Even the choice of paper stock was consistent, adding an almost ritualistic quality to the correspondence. These small, tangible details reinforced the impression that the watcher's presence was deliberate, calculated, and disturbingly persistent. The home itself carried decades of history, with past occupants whose lives and stories lent an uncanny resonance to the letters now arriving at its doors. Real estate records show that the house had been built in the early 20th century, passing through several owners, yet no prior event suggested a pattern of harassment or mystery. Still, the weight of history added an extra layer of unease for the Carpenters, who could not help but wonder if the house retained some lingering memory, or if their contemporary intruder had selected this property for reasons they could not know. News outlets documented the story with careful attention to verified facts, reporting on the letters and law enforcement efforts, while the family's caution and fear remained central to coverage. Local newspapers included photographs of the home and the letters, describing the Carpenter family's plight without resorting to sensational speculation. National attention eventually followed, highlighting the unique psychological terror inflicted by an anonymous correspondent who had turned an ordinary suburban home into a site of widespread intrigue. Journalists noted the meticulous nature of the letters, emphasizing the persistence and deliberate escalation over time. Onlookers along the block whispered among themselves, exchanging cautious glances and questions, aware that something unseen had unsettled the house at the center of town. While the wider neighborhood attempted to continue daily life, subtle gestures of curiosity and caution became commonplace. Mail carriers, delivery personnel, and even casual pedestrians reported an almost palpable tension around the property, a quiet acknowledgement that the ordinary rhythms of suburban life had been disrupted by the unseen observer. Every envelope was catalogued, fingerprints checked, and handwriting analysed, producing evidence that confirmed human authorship but offered no lead toward who had been watching. Analysts noted consistent typographic choices, the use of specific paper stock, and careful folding patterns that suggested planning and attention to detail. Forensic review confirmed that while the letters were unquestionably created by someone, the absence of identifying features left investigators frustrated, unable to trace the author through the conventional means normally relied upon in harassment or stalking cases. The final letters, arriving months later, carried a tone of finality yet retained a cryptic edge, hinting that the unseen presence might still linger beyond observation. These concluding correspondences no longer included specific references to daily routines, but suggested awareness of the family's fear and continued vigilance. Though the letters ceased eventually, they left a residue of apprehension, as if the author's departure had been strategic rather than conclusive, and the sense of being observed lingered in corners, windows, and quiet rooms. The psychological toll persisted, shaping how the family navigated intersections, entered rooms, and interpreted shadows, leaving an indelible sense that safety was provisional. Everyday movements became measured as though the eyes of the watcher were still present, tracking even mundane activity. Anxiety shaped behaviour, from shutting blinds to avoiding unnecessary trips outdoors, and even visitors were viewed with a cautious suspicion. Life within the home became a careful balance between normalcy and vigilance, each action measured against the memory of the persistent letters and their ominous implications. Investigators have traced every traceable lead, collected all possible evidence, and documented every letter, yet the sender's identity remains unknown, and the motives behind the messages are unresolved. Law enforcement closed some investigative avenues over time, citing a lack of definitive leads, while others remain open in the hope of eventual clarification. Experts in criminal profiling, psychological harassment, and stalking cases have reviewed the materials, acknowledging the unusual, meticulous nature of the correspondence and the enduring mystery it presents. Despite decades of study, the case continues to resist closure. Though the envelopes have stopped arriving, the stillness of the Westfield home carries a weight, as if invisible eyes continue to linger just beyond the edges of vision. The Lost Colony's lingering shadow, Roanoke Island, North Carolina, 1587. The shore of Roanoke Island greeted the first English settlers with dense fog and shifting tides, masking the land that would soon hold a colony destined to vanish without a trace. Arriving in 1587 under the auspices of the Virginia Company, nearly 115 men, women and children stepped onto the island with the hope of establishing a permanent English settlement. The terrain, both alluring and treacherous, offered rivers, marshes and fertile patches amid dense forests. Yet what promised opportunity also concealed hazards. Within months, the colony's fledgling homes and carefully tended gardens were set against an atmosphere of unease, a subtle reminder that survival in the New World was as uncertain as the tides that lapped the shoreline. Wooden structures rose amid the marshes and pines, modest homes and communal spaces crafted by hands both inexperienced and determined, striving to plant a foothold in an unforgiving landscape. Constructed with local timber and wattle and daub techniques, these dwellings provided shelter from wind and rain, yet the settlers had little time to fortify against other dangers. Supplies were scarce, and the colonists relied on both imported goods and the uncertain generosity of the land. Tools, nails and seeds were carefully rationed, while the labour of clearing fields and tending gardens dominated each day. Every act of settlement was a negotiation with an environment that tested both endurance and resolve. Governor John White sailed back to England for supplies, leaving behind men, women and children whose daily routines would become the silent stage for an unresolved disappearance. White's journey was delayed by the outbreak of war with Spain and the resulting naval pressures, stretching a resupply mission into a 3-year absence. During this period, the colonists faced isolation with no assurance that reinforcements or provisions would arrive. Letters and records from White's return note preparations, settlements, and interactions with local tribes, yet they stop abruptly, leaving the final months of the colony shrouded in silence and speculation. 3 years later, White returned to find the settlement deserted, the buildings weathered and empty, a stark tableau that offered only questions where life had once thrived. The fences were intact, gardens overgrown, and personal belongings abandoned, yet not a single colonist could be accounted for. There were no signs of violent attack or struggle, no evidence of fire, and only fragments of domestic life remained scattered across the site. Contemporary observers and White himself described a landscape frozen in absence, a place once bustling with human activity now rendered silent and mysterious. Carved into a post, the word Croatoan stood as a lone enigmatic clue, its presence both deliberate and haunting, suggesting a movement or message that remains unexplained. White interpreted the carving as a potential destination or clue left by the colonists, a single word hinting at their possible integration with the Croatoan tribe on Hatteras Island. Yet, subsequent attempts to locate evidence on Croatoan territory proved inconclusive. The meaning, intent, and outcome behind this solitary word continue to challenge historians, leaving it as the enduring symbol of the colony's disappearance. Recent digs uncovered fragments of tools, pottery shards, and hearth remains, tangible remnants that confirm human habitation, yet fail to reveal the fate of the colonists. Archaeological teams have uncovered foundations of homes, post holes, and traces of defensive structures, each artifact offering glimpses of daily life. Items such as iron nails, ceramic fragments, and fragments of glass indicate ongoing activity, yet they stop short of explaining why the colony vanished entirely. Despite careful documentation and modern scientific methods, the archaeological record preserves only hints, leaving the essential mystery unresolved. Digs have revealed not only household items, but also remnants of palisades and post holes that outline structures long eroded by time, offering tangible evidence of defensive planning and communal organisation. Bone fragments, clay pottery, and fragments of tools point to daily routines, meals, and craftsmanship within the colony, each object preserved just enough to speak of lives lived in isolation. Soil analysis has suggested small-scale agriculture, while nearby shell middens provide insight into foraging practices. Collectively, these discoveries form a patchwork of human activity, hinting at a settlement that was organised, resourceful, and deeply vulnerable, leaving only fragments behind when it vanished. The island's marshes, tidal creeks, and dense forests shaped daily life, presenting both sustenance and peril, and leaving any disappearance cloaked within the island's natural concealments. Seasonal storms could flood settlements and obscure paths, while dense woods offered shelter for both wildlife and people moving unseen. The settlers contended with mosquitoes, difficult terrain, and unpredictable tides, all of which complicated agriculture and travel. Environmental pressures provide a plausible context for dispersal or hardship, yet no evidence definitively explains the colony's fate, leaving speculation anchored in geography rather than confirmed events. Historical records note interactions with the Croatoan and neighbouring tribes, whose presence may have influenced the colonists' movements, yet documentation stops short of clarifying the outcomes. Gifts were exchanged, alliances tentatively formed, and seasonal movements observed, suggesting a degree of coexistence. Yet while some scholars posit that colonists may have integrated with local communities, there is no verified record of settlement or continued habitation, leaving such theories grounded in circumstantial evidence rather than documented fact. Recorded accounts have long suggested relocation, assimilation, starvation, or disease, presenting possibilities supported by fragments of evidence, though no theory fully accounts for the complete absence. Chronicles from contemporaries and later historians detail hardships faced by early English settlers, including scarce food, exposure, and isolation. Yet each hypothesis, while plausible, leaves questions unanswered. Why leave only the single word Croatoan? Why abandon personal possessions? And why leave no trace of ongoing habitation detectable by modern archaeology? The mystery persists, compelling study and debate even centuries later. Modern forensic studies and remote surveys continue to probe the landscape, revealing traces of settlement yet producing no definitive answers, keeping the centuries-old enigma alive. LiDAR imaging, soil analysis, and careful mapping of post holes have identified possible building locations and activity zones, yet none conclusively link to a particular outcome. Artifacts collected from surrounding areas are consistent with colonial activity, but whether they mark temporary relocation, dispersal, or a permanent departure remains unknown. Technology has illuminated fragments of the past, but it cannot rewrite the final chapter of the lost colony. The lost colony has inspired legends, folklore, and historical scholarship, leaving an indelible mark on North Carolina's identity, a reminder that unresolved stories endure far beyond their time. Tales of disappearance, assimilation, and supernatural speculation permeate regional history, often blending historical fact with legend. Despite the mythologizing, documented records remain the anchor for understanding. Ship logs, letters, maps, and eyewitness accounts are preserved, allowing historians to trace known events while acknowledging the persistent absence that fuels curiosity and imagination alike. Historians and archaeologists revisit artifacts, maps, and written accounts, piecing together fragments of evidence while acknowledging that some truths may remain forever obscured. Each new excavation or document analysis generates hypotheses, yet the colony's final fate remains elusive. Scholarly debates continue over whether the settlers moved inland, joined local tribes, or succumbed to natural forces. The work is meticulous, combining attention to detail with careful interpretation, yet it underscores the enduring power of a mystery that no single discovery has resolved. Today the island is quiet, with the wind weaving through hollowed structures and forested paths, carrying a sense of absence that feels almost tangible among the ruins. Visitors note a haunting stillness, a subtle tension between the beauty of the coastal landscape and the void left by vanished lives. Trees bend in coastal breezes, marshes ripple with tide water, and the remnants of buildings suggest habitation long abandoned. The environment itself seems to echo the silence of those who once lived there, their absence resonating across centuries. Though centuries have passed, the silent whispers of Roanoke linger among the trees, hinting at lives vanished yet never forgotten. The Keddy Cabin Murders, Keddy, California, 1981. The small cabin in Keddy's remote subdivision sat quietly among the tall pines, its weathered wooden siding blending into the shadowed forest that surrounded it. Yet, on the night of April 11th, 1981, it became the site of a violence so abrupt and incomprehensible that it would haunt the town for decades. The cluster of cabins along narrow, unpaved roads gave the illusion of community, yet isolation was pervasive. The wind through the trees carried an eerie stillness, and even routine sounds of nocturnal wildlife seemed subdued, as though nature itself recoiled from what was about to unfold. Inside Cabin 28, 4 people lived lives that appeared ordinary to anyone observing from outside. Glenn Stacy, his wife Sue, Sue's son John, and Glenn's friend Dana Wingate. Glenn worked in construction, maintaining a presence in the town's small social network, while Sue balanced part-time employment with domestic responsibilities. And Dana, a close friend of Glenn's, had often stayed over for social visits. Their daily routines were well known to neighbours and documented in school, work and local records. Yet none of this hinted at the impending tragedy that would turn familiar faces into victims of inexplicable violence. Neighbours first sensed something was wrong the following morning, noting the unusual silence that hung over Cabin 28. The interiors were found locked and still, the occupants unresponsive, their bodies bearing the marks of sudden and brutal death. The discovery shocked Keddy, a town accustomed to quiet evenings and minimal crime, and the contrast between the peaceful forest outside and the horror within the cabin left investigators and residents alike unsettled. Officers who first approached the cabin described a sense of unease as they stepped into rooms that should have carried the normal traces of domestic life, now tainted by violence. Police meticulously documented the crime scene, noting the positions of the victims and the injuries they had sustained. Glenn Stacy and Dana Wingate had been stabbed and bludgeoned, while Sue and John Stacy bore similar marks, each death executed with a ferocity that suggested both speed and intent. Despite the extreme brutality, there were no signs of forced entry, leaving investigators to wonder whether the killer had known the residents or possessed the ability to bypass locks with ease. Household items appeared undisturbed, creating a chilling juxtaposition between ordinary domestic order and lethal chaos. The hours leading up to the murders remain largely uncertain. Witness accounts suggest the family had returned home late at night, yet the exact sequence of events inside Cabin 28 has never been established. Calls and social visits documented in local records provide only fragments of a timeline, and the gaps in knowledge have fueled decades of speculation. Each unanswered question adds to the weight of mystery, emphasizing how little is known about the critical moments when violence erupted. Detectives combed through the cabin, examining every room, surface and corner for clues. Interviews with friends and neighbours provided context about the family's routines and relationships, yet no consistent suspect emerged. Evidence included fingerprints, blood patterns, and potential weapons, but the forensic limitations of the early 1980s hindered conclusive analysis. Investigators were left with fragments, clues that hinted at a narrative they could not fully reconstruct. The sense of incompleteness intensified the mystery, leaving a lasting impression of an event that defied ordinary explanation. The layout of the cabin and its surrounding lot contributed to both opportunity and unease. Cabin 28 was set back from the road, bordered by dense forest and undergrowth that obscured vision and muffled sound. Nearby cabins were minimal and widely spaced, offering little observation of any activity around the property. Investigators noted that the geographic isolation could have allowed an intruder to approach and leave undetected, and the forested terrain complicated any search for traces left behind. The very environment that made the cabin seem peaceful also made it perilous. From the start, investigators considered known acquaintances, potential personal disputes, and minor criminal activity in the area. Reports documented each theory: grudges, arguments, or possible opportunistic acts. Yet no theory produced sufficient evidence, and the lack of definitive leads created a paradoxical tension between what could have motivated the murders and what was known of the victims' lives. The official records highlight the careful documentation of potential motives while underscoring how little concrete information was available to support any conclusion. Forensic challenges further complicated the investigation. DNA profiling was in its infancy, and fingerprint collection could not definitively identify a perpetrator. Some items collected from the scene deteriorated before analysis, while others provided context without clarity. Investigators relied on circumstantial evidence and witness accounts, each offering partial insight but failing to reveal a complete picture. These limitations left open the possibility of solving the crime, yet simultaneously reinforced the enduring uncertainty surrounding Cabin 28. Over the years, renewed investigative efforts and sporadic media attention brought intermittent hope of resolution. Law enforcement revisited interviews, reviewed evidence, and issued appeals for information from the public. Journalists and true crime researchers examined the case repeatedly, often highlighting new leads or overlooked details. Despite these efforts, the murders remained unresolved, and the combination of brutality, isolation, and incomplete evidence ensured the mystery persisted as one of the most haunting in California's history. The murders had a profound impact on the Keddie community. Residents reported a lasting sense of unease, particularly those living near the cabin. Local coverage emphasized the shocking violence and the ambiguity surrounding motive and suspect identity. Schools, businesses, and neighborhood social circles were all affected, as the memory of the murders shaped perceptions of personal safety and community security. Cabin 28 became a focal point for cautionary tales and collective anxiety, its presence in the town remaining a constant reminder of the night's terror. Community members, local journalists, and even visiting researchers have documented the continued fascination with Cabin 28. News articles recount the brutal scene, detailing investigative attempts, and public appeals highlight the enduring quest for answers. True crime publications and documentaries reference the case as emblematic of unsolved violent crime in small, isolated towns. These accounts contribute to the atmospheric tension surrounding the cabin, preserving a sense of unresolved horror that has persisted across decades. To this day, law enforcement has not identified a perpetrator. The murders of Cabin 28 remain officially unsolved, and case files sit in county archives, occasionally reviewed but yielding no definitive answers. The passage of time has not diminished public interest, nor clarified the events of April 11th, 1981. The unknowns, the timing of the attacks, the motive, and the identity of the killer continue to dominate both official records and local law, sustaining a quiet, enduring tension. Even now, the cabin stands empty, its walls holding the echo of that night, a silent sentinel to violence that remains unresolved and impenetrable to explanation. The structure, weathered by decades of exposure to sun, wind, and rain, carries the memory of lives abruptly ended. Visitors report a palpable heaviness in the surrounding forest, where the creak of floorboards or rustle of leaves seems magnified, each sound reinforcing the reality that some truths may never surface. Cabin 28, in its abandoned state, embodies both history and unanswered questions, a permanent reminder of horror lodged in ordinary life. Even decades later, Cabin 28 stands as a silent witness to a night of horror whose secrets remain locked within its walls. The Bennington Triangle Disappearances, Bennington, Vermont, 1945-1950. Deep in southwestern Vermont, a stretch of wilderness would come to be known for a series of disappearances between 1945 and 1950 that defied explanation and unnerved the local population. Over a few short years, multiple residents vanished without a trace, leaving investigators, families, and the press grappling with both the unknown and the impossible. The region's rolling hills, dense forests, and remote trails provided ample cover for natural accidents, yet the pattern of vanishing individuals, each seemingly healthy and prepared for travel, suggested something more perplexing than mere misfortune. The small towns nearby began to whisper of a triangle of fear, marking the area with quiet growing unease. Towering mountains and dense forests framed the region, with winding trails and hidden ravines that complicated both travel and search efforts during harsh winters. Snow-laden pines and rocky inclines rendered even brief expeditions arduous, and sudden weather changes could transform a routine hike into a life-threatening ordeal. Streams that gurgled softly in summer turned to icy torrents in winter, and fog often settled low across the valleys, obscuring vision and muffling sound. Search teams often reported feeling disoriented, even when familiar with the terrain, and the very landscape that drew hikers and hunters now seemed to conspire in concealing those who vanished. In December 1946, Paula Weldon was last seen walking along the Long Trail, a young college student whose disappearance prompted one of the earliest and most extensive searches in the area. Witnesses recalled seeing her depart cheerfully for a short hike, carrying only modest supplies for a winter walk, yet she never returned. Local volunteers, police officers, and college students combed the woods for days, tracing her footprints through snow and mud, only to find that they abruptly ended without any explanation. Despite the scale of the search and the clear documentation of her movements, Paula's fate remained entirely unknown, a chilling introduction to the pattern of vanishings that would follow. 3 years later, James Tedford vanished while travelling on a local bus, reportedly last observed sitting quietly near the rear, never to reach his intended stop. He had been returning from a routine errand, and his disappearance occurred during daylight, in full view of other passengers and the driver. The bus reached its final destination without incident, yet Tedford was nowhere to be found. Investigators combed the route, searching nearby woods and roadsides, but discovered no evidence of an accident or foul play. The unexplained nature of a disappearance in broad daylight heightened both public concern and the sense that the Bennington area was a place where the ordinary could dissolve into the impossible. The following year, Paul Jepson disappeared while hunting in the same remote terrain, leaving his father behind and sparking desperate searches that yielded no trace. Witnesses confirmed that he had been experienced and cautious, well aware of the dangers of the Vermont wilderness, yet the unforgiving forest seemed to swallow him entirely. Search parties scoured the area for days, employing tracking dogs, local guides, and state authorities, but all that remained were the unbroken woods, the creaking of distant trees, and the lingering questions that refused to resolve. Each disappearance added weight to a growing sense that something inexplicable haunted the region. Law enforcement agencies, volunteers, and neighbouring towns mobilised repeatedly, combing forests, rivers, and ridges, only to encounter the frustrating absence of clues that might explain the vanishings. Each search was painstakingly documented, with officers taking notes on terrain, weather, and witness accounts, yet the results were always the same: missing persons without a trace. The repetition of these failures created unease among authorities, and some later reflected that the area seemed to erase the evidence of human passage. These procedural accounts highlight the challenges posed by both natural and possibly inexplicable factors. Families and residents lived under a quiet unease, sharing whispers about the strange pattern of disappearances and questioning whether some unseen danger lingered in the wilderness. Parents hesitated to allow children to hike the Long Trail alone. Neighbours watched roads and paths more vigilantly, and townspeople spoke in hushed tones of mysterious figures glimpsed in the distance or faint noises heard deep in the forest. The pattern of disappearances created a tension that persisted long after each search party returned home, instilling the sense that the Bennington Triangle was not simply a location, but a presence in itself, one that defied understanding. Despite differences in age, occupation, and circumstances, investigators noticed subtle consistencies: remote locations, fleeting last sightings, and the inability of search teams to recover evidence. Each case, while unique, reinforced a growing pattern: disappearance without a trace, often in areas where natural hazards existed but could not fully explain the outcomes. Maps of the vanishings revealed a triangular zone bounded by Bennington, Woodford, and Glastonbury Mountain, lending the region both its name and its ominous reputation. The repetition of these anomalies left a haunting impression, even on experienced authorities accustomed to accident and misfortune. Experts considered natural hazards, steep ravines, icy rivers, sudden storms and wildlife, but none could convincingly account for the totality of the cases, leaving uncertainty to dominate the narrative. While it was plausible that one or two individuals might have succumbed to environmental dangers, the frequency and consistency of the disappearances defied simple explanation. Researchers noted that the victims were generally competent, prepared, and familiar with the wilderness, which made their vanishings all the more unsettling. Nature offered possibilities, but it failed to satisfy the growing sense of mystery. Tales and local lore began circulating alongside official reports, from fleeting shadows glimpsed between trees to rumours of unexplained lights over the mountains, adding layers of eerie speculation. These accounts were rarely verified, but they contributed to the atmosphere of dread that enveloped the Bennington Triangle. Townspeople shared stories at town meetings, in taverns, and with journalists, creating a folklore that blended fact and rumour. Over time, these narratives fused with the documented disappearances, giving the region a reputation that was as much psychological as it was geographical. Newspapers and radio broadcasts documented the disappearances extensively, drawing national attention and ensuring that the name Bennington Triangle would become synonymous with unresolved mystery. Reports highlighted both the tragedy of each vanished individual and the bewildering inability of authorities to find explanations. Headlines spoke of Vermont vanishings and mysterious triangle, capturing public imagination and creating a cultural awareness that outlasted the immediate events. Even decades later, archival articles serve as reminders of the extraordinary concentration of unexplained incidents in this isolated region. Decades later, researchers and amateur investigators continue to revisit the region, retracing the long trail and isolated roads, hoping for insights yet encountering only dense woods and unanswered questions. Each expedition yielded traces of footprints, abandoned campsites, or the sounds of wildlife, but never evidence of the vanished. Maps, diaries, and witness statements were re-examined, generating new theories, yet none conclusively solved the puzzle. The combination of rugged terrain, incomplete records, and time elapsed ensured that the mystery persisted, a landscape layered with unanswered questions. The accumulation of vanishings, the rugged terrain, and the unanswered calls for closure created a tension that continues to linger over the area, a persistent shadow in Vermont's history. Historians and investigators alike recognize that the region's reputation is inseparable from the incidents themselves. The Bennington Triangle exists as both a geographic reality and a locus of uncertainty. Visitors report a quiet, almost tangible weight in the forests, a sensation that seems to echo the unanswered questions of those who disappeared. The mystery is woven into the land itself, subtle yet inescapable. Even now, the Bennington Triangle maintains an aura of unresolved tension, its forests and mountains holding stories that may never be told. The forests and mountains of the Bennington Triangle keep their secrets tightly, and those who vanished may have left nothing behind but questions that refuse to be answered.